a number of years ago. He has since passed away, but this story is one that I always remember in my mind as being the one that gave him the most chills. He didn't tell it often, but when he did, and it usually required alcohol for him to do so, it would always give him a look that I rarely ever saw in him. A true and profound fear that we as a family rarely ever saw, and a particular vulnerability that was very unlike my father. But now, onto the story. My dad was working in the army. I can't say where, I don't know if I can now. In any case, he never said specifically where. This must have been at least 50 years ago. He was on patrol on some rural area of the base. He was led to believe and understand that the area had previously been somewhat inhabited. The land was repurposed as a base, and the subsequent houses in the rural vicinity were either destroyed or just left. I think there were about 3 houses that were in the woods which were already overgrown and abandoned by the time the base was got, where it was considered too much work to go about bringing them down. So they were left there, as edicts to what came before. My dad was doing a patrol one night in the dark. He said it must have been past midnight, and he was by himself, on a little vehicle, making sure that everything was in order. He was relatively bored and just listening to the sound of nature, when suddenly he spots something out in the woods. He jumps off his vehicle and shines a flashlight towards the woods, where he clearly sees something move. He radios in to say that he's seen movement, and he starts making his way closer. He sees and hears footsteps and movement, the swish of a robe, it seems. My dad walks near to one of these old houses, and he illuminates the house. Doesn't see anyone inside. But now, the intruder, person, is gone. He makes his way towards the house, which he had never done before, and is feeling a bit apprehensive. Even though theoretically there should be no one there, it still gives him the creeps. He opens the door, which was unlocked, and shouts out to reveal themselves, and that they were trespassing. But there is no noise whatsoever. He looks around the house, the musty smell invading his nose, and his ears only being filled with the footsteps he himself makes in this sinister house. It's very small. He clears every room downstairs and starts making his way up these thin, rickety wooden steps, which he was dubious would hold his weight, but he needed to do a thorough inspection, as protocol demanded. When he reached the top of the stairs, he noticed there were 3 small rooms. He went into each of them in turn, and upon the last room, saw a small ladder and an attic leading up to it. He had a really bad feeling. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing on end, and he really didn't want to go up those stairs. But he knew he must. So, up he went. One of the stair rungs actually broke under his feet on his way up, which nearly gave him a heart attack, but he soldiered on. When he made it to the top, he shined his flashlight all around, and as expected, heard and saw nothing. Just a few old children's toys and sheets and stuff, nothing of real interest. He did see something though. Maybe there could be someone hidden behind the sheet. The attic was quite small, and so he made his way in and pulled back the sheet to reveal nothing. Satisfied with his search, he made his way back down out of the house. He hadn't got any response via radio yet, which he thought was odd, but brushed it off and made his way back to the vehicle. Just as the keys were entering the ignition, did he hear something again? He looked over and swore he saw a shadow move. He shined his flashlight in the general direction and saw that again it was heading towards the house. This time he ran, convinced he was going to catch whatever or whoever it was. He ran, but when he reached the house, it was gone. He used his flashlight to shine all around the house, not wanting or thinking he should go in, seeing as the door hadn't made a sound as it squeaked like hell the first time he entered. When he'd pretty much done a whole lap of the house, he decided to give it up. He wasn't sure what it was, and thought that it would be best to leave this to someone else. Just as he was rounding the house to go towards his vehicle, did he hear a light tap on the glass of one of the windows. He knew something bad was about to happen. He said he could feel a distinct chill in the air as he twisted his head slowly, and his eyes saw red eyes in the window. It wasn't so much the eyes themselves, but the dark shadow of what appeared to be a body, absolutely towering over him. It was behind the window, at least 8 feet tall. As you imagine, my dad promptly crapped himself and ran as fast as he could to the vehicle, and drove all the way back. He told absolutely no one this story. It took him a number of years before he even shared it with us. But a few years after, while out with a few drinks with a few colleagues of his, did one of them bring up the abandoned properties. They asked the usual questions about if anyone had been in one, and my dad piped up. He said he thought he once saw something while doing an inspection, but it turned out to be nothing. One of the members of the group went silent, and then asked, "Did you see the eyes? Were they red?" The others in the group didn't know what they were talking about. Something in the house, perhaps? And my dad looked him square in the eyes and just nodded. The nod was so much more than a nod, charged with comprehension and understanding that they had shared in the same disturbing experience. They never spoke any more about it, but my dad admits that it was something truly disturbing, and never inspected any abandoned properties again. I had just moved out of a share house in the suburbs and into my own crappy one-bedroom apartment in the city. I am a male, and at the time was around 25 years old. My apartment, while old and small, was located about 500 meters from one of the most popular night spots in the inner city. As I was in my mid-20s and out on my own, this was the perfect place for me. This was because my friends and I were quite social and would frequent bars and nightclubs in the city, and the taxi fares were starting to add up. Also, this new apartment was close to my work, so the move made sense. I got settled in right away and invited my friends over for pre-drinks before hitting the clubs. Due to the limited space in the apartment, this means that some friends were inside and some were drinking on the walkway just out front. We had the music up and had just started drinking, but between songs I could hear the couple next door arguing. Now the apartment was old and crappy, which meant thin walls as well, so I pressed an ear to the wall in order to listen. I hadn't met any of my new neighbors at the time, as I didn't take too long in moving in, and I didn't see anyone during. I was curious. Judging from what I could determine while eavesdropping, there were a gay couple in their early 30s. One of the men was yelling at the other to go next door and tell us to keep it down. The other was arguing that it was just a housewarming and to let it go for the night. Since I didn't want to cause too much trouble, I marshaled everyone outside to start making our way to the club, leaving my new neighbors in peace. Later that night, I came home alone as I was tired from the move and decided to let my friends carry on partying without me. I arrived at my door and proceeded to fumble around for my keys, when I looked up to see a man standing on the walkway in front of the next-door apartment smoking a cigarette. He was tall and thin with brown, oily hair. I noticed that he had a cut lip and a faded but still visible black eye. "Good day," I said. "Sorry about the noise earlier," correctly assuming he was my neighbor. He replied, "Nah, you're right, mate. I'm Chris," and he shook my hand. I noticed his knuckles were red, and a little bit scratched up, so I knew something was off. I apologized for the noise and said, "I hope I didn't cause any trouble for you." He withdrew his hand with a soft but cracking voice and said, "Nah, it's alright. Rick just gets a bit cranky sometimes, I'm used to it." With that, I finished off the conversation and told Chris that I'd see him later. It was about 2 a.m. at this point, and I just wanted to sleep, but couldn't help worrying about the potential domestic abuse going on next door. I decided to keep an eye on it for now, as I didn't have all the info. For all I knew, he could have gotten into a fight with someone else. As the weeks passed, I noticed that my new neighbors got drunk regularly and would argue almost every time. I could tell that Rick was the dominant one, as his voice was a lot deeper, and Chris seemed to be afraid of him during their shouting matches. This is why I kept my distance and never really socialized with them. I would even overhear them arguing about me, and that Rick thought that Chris liked me, etc. I would just tune out all of this with headphones and video games, not to mention an active social life and full-time work to keep me occupied. I did find myself avoiding having guests over because of the neighbors. I would opt to meet people out, as their arguments would be quite upsetting. This was working out fine enough until Christmas Eve that year. I was arriving home after having come from some last-minute Christmas shopping. I was getting ready for a night of present wrapping, as I was to visit my family the following day for Christmas. As I arrive home, I noticed 2 police cars outside and Anna, an Asian woman who lived a few apartments up from Chris, screaming. I asked her what happened, and all she said was, "It's just so sad," while sobbing. I could see 3 officers trying to restrain someone, and there was blood on their uniform. I came just a little bit closer to see Chris's oily brown hair in the center of the affray. His face was bleeding from his jaw where he had apparently been slashed by something sharp. They got him to his feet, and I could see that his cheek had been cut so deep the skin was flapping open as he struggled and resisted with the police. I recoiled in shock, and I went to comfort Anna, who was crying uncontrollably at this point. Suddenly, Rick's voice boomed out of nowhere. "You see what you've done? You loser, just kill yourself." This frightened me, and my instinct was to get me and Anna to safety. Even though the cops were here, they had their hands full with Chris, and I certainly didn't want to get involved in such an ugly fight where knives were involved. Anna refused to come with me and said she would be fine. I looked around to see where Rick was, and he kept yelling at Chris the whole time. The 3 cops struggled to restrain him, and I could hear Chris whimpering apologetically in between. I couldn't see where Rick was, so I decided to just go to my apartment and lock the door. As I turned to go, I froze, as Rick's voice boomed, "Where do you think you're going?" A chill went down my spine as my brain struggled to reconcile the fact that these words were coming from Chris's mouth. I felt panic grip me as I realized that all this time Rick and Chris were the same person. All the fighting, laughing, drinking, and carry on that I couldn't help overhearing the last couple of months had come from one solitary person, a lonely guy in his small 1-bedroom apartment. For some reason this made me feel sick. I later learned from Anna that this wasn't the first time the police had come out to take Chris away. Anna explained that he spent a few months at the local psychiatric hospital each time. His father owned the apartment, so it was here waiting for him when he got out. I moved out a few months later, and while it's a sad situation for Chris, I really do feel for him. My wife went to university with a woman who had a big, jagged scar on her throat, and one day she told her how she got it. Some guy followed her when she left school, grabbed her from behind, cut her throat, and raped her. She woke up in the middle of the attack and got her thumb into his mouth and ripped his cheek open, gave him a full-on Joker scar on one side, which distracted him enough for her to get away. The idiot misogynistic judge gave the guy a reduced sentence because she was unconscious during most of the rape, so didn't suffer as much. I despise judges who give lenient sentences to rapists and other violent men. I chatted to my wife about this, and she also mentioned that he originally got 6 years, but she and her family appealed the leniency of the sentence and got it increased to 7. Some justice was at least served. My mum was in the Air Force for 23 years, and this is what she told me. She was a medic and worked in hospitals, and worked at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany in the 90s, and she said there were a few areas of the hospital that had seen countless numbers of veteran patients and deaths where the faculty got really unwelcome vibes from, or where they'd see shadows or hear voices and footsteps. But this one time, she was in a certain wing of the hospital where she frequently worked, and she needed to go to the 4th floor, and she did so with a fellow airman since it was required that they travel in pairs, the buddy system. So they walked into the elevator, pressed 4, and oddly enough the elevator went past 4, and came back down and kept going up and down without ever opening the doors. Then when it finally opened on 4, they looked out into the open doors and saw a floor of the hospital that was completely unfamiliar. Now my mum knew this area inside and out, but said that it was a floor she had never seen before. It even looked like it could have been from a different period of time. It was completely empty. Her and her teammate didn't say anything or make a move to step out. I think they both felt that was wrong. Then the doors closed. The elevator skipped around a few more times, and then she came back to floor 4, and it was completely back to normal, the way they knew it to be. Her teammate said, "What just happened?" She replied with, "I dunno." And they never spoke of it to each other again. This happened when I was a bartender about 4 years ago, but I think about it often, and it has changed the way I operate throughout life. I now refuse to go to any store alone after midnight. I was 25, and an attractive, slender blonde at the time. On a busy Friday night, I was bartending with the bar manager, and he had noticed that we were very low on some bar necessities after the dinner rush. Lemons, limes, bitters, that kind of thing. So I was sent out to a 24-hour grocery store down the road to pick up the odds and ends that we would require to get us through the weekend. I picked up everything that was asked of me without trouble at the store, until I got to the liquor aisle. There were 2 country-looking guys that were probably around my age in the aisle, and they were staring at me and whispering to each other in a way that made me uncomfortable. So I assumed they were making comments about me, all pretty innocent so far. Before they could approach me, I grabbed what I needed very quickly and power-walked to the self-checkout. I really booked it out of there, because when you're a bartender, it's kind of like you're on a stage and are required to be charming and interact with people that you otherwise absolutely wouldn't be able to tolerate unless you were being paid to do so. This is another reason why I'm not a bartender anymore. I get to the self-checkout, and hot on my tail are the 2 guys. I'm scanning my stuff, and they use the scanning station next to me. I get a better look at them now, as they are right next to me. One is taller, muscular, and average-looking. The other one is shorter and more plump. They both looked dirty, and their eyes were completely bloodshot. I'm not even sure if they were high or something or had already been drinking for a while. They continued to stare at me, and our eyes awkwardly met. So I did the pleasant, Midwesternly thing to do and flashed them a quick, half-assed, closed-lipped smile to be polite. The taller one starts trying to talk to me. "Hey, looks like you're ready to party, huh?" I replied something like, "Yeah, something like that. It's not for me, though." They walk closer to me and ignore their responsibility to scan their items. "Oh, must be for your boyfriend, huh?" I flash the awkward, tight-lipped smile again and roll my eyes slightly, like This is your hint that I'm not interested, fellas. The taller one continues to try to talk to me. You should come hang out with us tonight. We could show you a real good time if you know what I mean. No thanks, I'm good. Already have plans. Well, the tall one starts to get upset that his moves aren't working like he'd hoped, and starts using a more threatening tone and moves very close to me, literally 2 inches away, but I ignore him, staying focused on the scanner. I don't think he had showered in a few days by the smell of him. He gets a little louder and says, I see how it is. You probably only screw doctors and rich men like that. You think you're too good for us? We can show you that you aren't. We can teach you a lesson. Now, I'm not sure what context he meant this in, but it definitely wasn't good. Still not looking at him, I turn away, so my body is blocking his view of my purse, which I set on the scanner, to grab my 4-inch pocket knife out and slide it up my jacket sleeve in case I need to protect myself, acting like I'm searching for my wallet. I do this, however, in view of the self-scan worker standing at her podium, and look at her with wide eyes trying to communicate that I do not feel safe and that I might need help. I turn back to the machine and slide my credit card to pay, while the creepy and hostile guys are practically standing on top of me. The machine malfunctions and starts beeping. The lady worker comes over immediately, and the guys standing next to me change their expression from, I'm planning to torture you for a few days and toss your body into a creek, to, just your friendly good old country boys making polite conversation over here. They actually tried to act like I knew them, and were friends, so the worker wouldn't be alerted to their ill intentions. They tried joking with the worker, saying I was stealing something and that's why the machine went off. The worker was definitely not buying it. She was a 6-foot-tall woman with some muscle on her. I wouldn't mess with her on my best day. She pressed a few buttons on the screen, shooting the guys a very unimpressed look when they were trying to act charming, and cancels the order completely. She turns to me and says, I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. This machine seems to not be working correctly. Why don't you gather your things and I'll ring you up at an actual register. She puts her hand on my back and gives me a wide-eyed look, like I gave her a minute earlier, letting me know that she sees I'm in danger. I pick up my things and follow her to a register that's near the security office. The guys linger around the self-scan, still glaring at me, and eventually complete their purchases but stand at the exit assuming they're waiting for me. I felt like I would be walking to my death if I made it to my exit in that moment. The worker keeps a close eye on the guys and scans my items. As she's scanning, she tells me there really wasn't anything wrong with the machine I was using. It just misread my credit card, and she said, I had a bad feeling about those guys from the moment they walked in, and then I saw them getting aggressive towards you. I already rang security to be ready to walk you to the parking lot and make sure you left safely when you were ready to leave. Then I saw you take that knife out and put it in your sleeve, getting ready to protect yourself. Good girl. As much as I'd like to see you show them, they picked the wrong girl to mess with. I'm glad I was able to pull you aside and make sure you were safe. I see them waiting by the door for you. I'll just keep pressing buttons on the screen and act like I'm having trouble with your order until they give up and go outside. Our security officer and I are both going to escort you to your vehicle when you leave. I thought to myself, this woman seriously deserves a raise. I thanked her over and over again and told her what they said to me, and I was getting afraid because I don't know what these guys are capable of. As I'm talking to her, my bar manager calls me to see what's taking so long. I explain what's happened, and he was obviously very concerned and ready to come up there himself and kick some ass. A sweet sentiment indeed. By the time I hung up, the guys had given up and walked out to the parking lot. The worker said to give it another few minutes because she had a feeling they may still be in there, waiting for me to walk out, and see which vehicle was mine so that they could follow me. My instant thought was, now way, they have to have been gone by now. But I was wrong. The worker and security guard escorted me out, and it was after midnight, so you can imagine how empty the lot was. towards the back of the lot, there sat an old, big pickup truck running with the lights on pointed towards the store. It was a huge parking lot, and it wouldn't have made sense for them to initially park like that. So I'm assuming they moved the truck to sit that way, so that they had a full view of when I exited the store and got to my vehicle. It was like being stalked by hungry lions. When I unlocked my car and they saw that me, the worker and the guard were looking directly at them, and that I wasn't getting in my car until we watched them leave, they then peeled out of the parking lot. I mean, they seriously did a burnout to establish that they were pissed and trying to intimidate us. Poor creeps didn't get their way. I thanked the worker and the guard over and over again, as I'm certain that they had just saved my life, or at least saved me from having to live with whatever those guys were planning to do to me. I did write a long letter to the store manager and their corporate location describing how their employees protected me and how grateful I was. I really hope that earned her a promotion, bonus, raise, or something. She didn't know me at all and was ready to protect me, which really isn't her job, but she did it anyway. Needless to say, I do not go late night shopping by myself anymore, and never will again. I was by myself in the engine room of a submarine on the mid-watch, just a newly reported sailor trying to find equipment so that I could display my knowledge to one of the watchstanders. There are a number of bays in the engine room lower level, with narrow passages that pass through the center. I came down one of the ladders, and I swore I saw someone walking across the ship about 15 feet in front of me. I could hear his footsteps as he walked around the corner and out of sight. 3 problems. 1, he was wearing utilities, an older light blue blouse, and dark navy slacks. Nobody has utilities anymore. They had been phased out 3 years earlier. 2, there was only one other person awake in that engine room that late at night, and he was standing at the top of the ladder behind me, waiting for me to come up with the answer to his question. 3, he wasn't actually there. I wrote it off as sleep deprivation, but I'll admit, it shook me for a while. Fast forward to 4 months later. I had gone out to sea with another submarine of the same type. While I was there, I met a sailor who had previously served on my ship. After a few weeks of standing watch with him, he told me a story of a sailor who had committed suicide while on watch when he served on my ship almost a decade earlier, in the engine room, in his utilities. I wish I could have gotten a picture of the look on my face. I'm sure it was the definition of disbelief. I worked at a small family-owned bicycle shop. My boss, the father of the family, was a pretty nice guy, as far as I knew him anyway. One day I was rearranging displays, and my boss's wife and kids were there. It was a pretty normal day, until someone slammed the shop door open and emptied a full pistol clip into the shop, specifically at my boss. I got one in the stomach as soon as I knew what was happening, and I waited until I heard the guy run away. My boss was shot a few times in the head and chest and was obviously dead on the spot. His daughter got hit in the upper arm, and the wife broke her arm diving to the floor. It happened in Iloilo, Philippines around 2015. Apparently, it was about my boss not paying money he owed to the guy that murdered him, and I still don't know if they ever caught him. I used to work for the US Air Force munition system, code 2WOX1. Basically, I was just towing trailers back and forth all night. Well, one night I was alone, checking a trailer behind our conventional munition shop before grabbing it and towing it away. The trailer was parked next to the fence, and I was on the side opposite the fence. As I moved my flashlight to check the tires, it caught my eyes outside the wire. So I swept the light up and looked up for 5 minutes, trying to figure out what I'd seen, thinking it was like a coyote or something since we were in New Mexico. I figure I must have spooked it, so I turned off my light, finished my hookup and left. The next day I'm talking to a buddy in conventional, and they tell me they found tracks all over behind the fence next to the building, and had to report it to the security forces, since there wasn't really a road back there or anything, as it's a secure area. Then the guy, who happened to be a Native American, tells me this story about skinwalkers and how they like to spy on people who are alone and take their souls and stuff. And I did the damnedest to never be alone there again. You know, with a base this size, there's native burial grounds that we bulldozed at some point, and definitely pissed something off. Several years ago, when I was 25, I lived with my best friend at the time. Our friendship eventually started to dwindle, as it usually goes when you move in with a good friend, so she was rarely home. This night, however, she ended up staying up at our place, heading to bed early. I was a server at the time, so I stayed up pretty late, usually watching YouTube or smoking pot. This night was no different, except for the fact that my neighbors tried to take me. I'll go ahead and give you some background info on my house and my neighbors. We lived in a 3-bedroom house with 2 bedrooms and the kitchen facing the crazy neighbor. They were a younger couple living in a small mill house. They were constantly coming to our door and asking for handouts. Now, normally I'd be happy to help a neighbor out, but they would come over and ask for crazy stuff. For us to, fill up an old Mountain Dew bottle with water because theirs got shut off, beer, and once, literally, to ask for $1. They would constantly be knocking at our door to ask for help, and when we wouldn't answer, I'd peek through the window to see them either jacking cigarette butts from the ashtray or pressing their eyeballs against the door peephole to see if they could spot us. Anyway, there I was smoking some weed and watching YouTube on my couch when I heard a knock at the door. I rolled my eyes because I knew exactly who came a-knocking. It's 11 p.m. I checked the peephole and sure enough, the boyfriend was on my porch. Normally I'd just walk away and continue with my life, but he looked like he was in distress. I opened the door up to see what was up. Hey, I just wanted to come over and see if you could film my engagement. I got my girlfriend a ring here in my pocket, and I need you to follow me to the backyard to film it for me. Baffled but curious, I told him congrats and said that I'd be out in a second and that I just needed to put my shoes on. I shut the door behind me and locked it. Quickly I ran to the back room that looked out onto their backyard. I peeked through the blinds to see the setup. Nothing. Pitch black darkness. No sign of decoration or anything like that. Naturally, I woke up my roommate and told her what was going on. "Yes, screw that," she said, and we both walked back up to the door after the boyfriend started banging on it. I looked through the peephole again and couldn't see anything, and I was confused all the way up until he pulled his eyeball away from the peephole. I quickly turned around and put my back against the door. My roommate came running back to the door from hers, manning 2 wire hangers for protection. We both clung onto the hangers and set up against the door until he finally left. We were so freaked out, but we wanted to make sure we were overreacting. We went out to our back door and hopped into her car so we could do a drive-by, as they always had their front door open and also didn't have any blinds, so it was easy to see into their house. Slowly we crept by in her car and peered into their living room. Sitting on the couch and all staring at the wall, looking super strung out, was the couple and an older man. We sped off and ended up staying at a friend's house that night. I never answered the door for either of them again. One day I came home from work and an older lady was parked in their driveway. She walked up to me as I got out of my car and asked if I knew where the neighbors were. I told them I hadn't seen them for a while, and she informed me that she was the owner. She told me they were months late on rent and finally came to evict them. She entered the home to find it completely trashed. Needles, garbage everywhere, holes in the walls, and literal poop on the floor. I told her I was sorry to hear that she had to deal with all of that, but I was happy that they were finally gone. I'm not sure what was going on that night, but I'm glad that I didn't follow him into the backyard. My friend and I had a sneaking suspicion that he was going to take me, and that could have been the end of me. I work as a security/nighttime attendant at an apartment building. It's 24 stories and one of the oldest in the city. One night I'm sitting here when the phone rings at about 3 a.m. and I answer. Hello. This is Daniel at front desk. How can I help you? The voice on the other end sounds female, but was totally garbled, and the only bit I could make out was 23rd floor. I tried to tell the person that I could not understand them, and asked which apartment they were in, but again garbled a response, and I just made out 23rd floor. After the third time of trying to understand them, and the same response, I said since I couldn't understand them, I would go up and meet them in the hallway. So I go to the main elevators, and surprise, surprise, they are both on the 23rd floor. Fortunately, we have an older service elevator, and it's only on the 7th, so I call it down, get it, and hit the button for the 23rd. But it won't move and the inner door won't close. So I go to unlock the reset panel, and boom, we start going up, door still open. I'm freaking out a bit, and the elevator is shaking because it goes pretty fast and is old. As I'm ascending, I just stay towards the back, and finally, I reach floor 23. I step out, door closes just fine, and I look around the hallway. There's nobody around. I walk along slowly trying to listen for anyone awake who might have called, but there's nothing. So now I head in the opposite direction and go towards where the regular elevators are, and when I get to them, they are just sitting there, with their doors open. I was pretty freaked out, but I knew it would just be the elevators going fritz, so I get in and figured I'd just reset them and get them to floor 1, when I heard the sound of the back stairwell closing. I quickly get out, go to the stairwell, and lo and behold, there's no one there. But the maintenance door to the machine room is ajar, and at that time, I'm the only one in the building with a key. At the top of the building is a large machine room, housing all of the really loud machinery that does stuff in the building and allows access to the roof. I don't like going into there because it's creepy as hell, and no one ever goes in there. So at this point I'm seriously freaked out, but muster up and head inside. Hello? I shout, but to no response. The lights in this room flicker because they're terrible fluorescent, so I can't see well either. But at the end of the room I can make out the roof access door, and sure as hell it's slightly open. So I slowly continue forward, checking the space in between each machine as I walk by, to make sure there's no one there. And there isn't. I open the roof door access. I can't see anyone ahead of me on the roof, but there is a slight wraparound, and if there was a jumper or something, I needed to be sure. So I step out and leave the door ajar like it was. Almost immediately, the door is pulled shut. Now I might have written it off as wind or something, but this door is hard to shut and really hard to open. Really hard. I immediately grab the handle and hank it open, slam it behind me and run straight for the maintenance door. It automatically locks when it's closed, so I slam it shut too and go back to the 23rd floor hallway, get into an elevator, which the doors are still open for, and go all the way down to the 1st floor. I go back to the main lobby, and as soon as I sit down the phone rings. I pick it up, don't say a word, and sure as hell, garbly voice again. The only audible thing I can hear is a voice saying, 23rd floor. I hung up the phone, turned off the ringer, and spent the rest of the evening just staring at the parking garage security monitor. There's been a bunch of creepy things happening in this building. It's basically like the Overlook Hotel at night. I walked past a dark room here on the 1st floor once, and swore I saw myself standing inside it. The next night as I'm inside said room cleaning, the lights flip off, and I turn around to see a quick flash of myself walking past. There must be some creepy ghost or something playing games with me at work. Why was it trying to lure me onto the roof of the building? I can only speculate. Perhaps it wanted to throw me off. I'd like to share with you an extract from my grandpa's memoir. It goes like this. There was an incident during my time stationed in Guam back in the 1960s. I'm unable to explain very well. One day we got a call from a farmer claiming that something fell from the sky and landed on his farm. We knew no US satellites had gone down, so it was most likely Russian. We get out there to discover this small object. It was about the size of a baseball, completely clear, and on one side it had a waffle-like imprint on it, as if it were attached to a grid. Physically it felt like glass. We didn't know what to do with it, and one of our officers was an astronomer, so we presented it to him. He kept it as a paperweight. One day while speaking to him, I accidentally knocked the object off his desk, and it looked like it was cracked and about to shatter to pieces. About 5 minutes or so after, the object was clear again. All the cracks were gone. We struck it a few times again just to watch the object fix itself. I ended up telling my buddies about it, and they wouldn't believe me. When the officer was off base one day, we snuck into his quarters and took the object. Everyone then proceeded to try and break it, but it would keep fixing itself. We stopped doing this when someone had thrown it so hard it bounced off the cement and dented one of our fighter jets. Word about the object spread quickly. The local base newspaper even did a story on our incident, after the officer reluctantly allowed it. Days later, some men, purporting to be from Weapons Bureau, showed up on base. Not only did they confiscate the object, but they tore through our quarters in order to find every issue of the newspaper which was printed. After that, we were told everything we had seen and read were classified, and to this day, I'm unable to explain the object's unique properties. This isn't my story, but my cousin's. She was married to a crazy man. I won't go into the detail about the way he was, but it was awful. He was insane. Also, before he married my cousin, he had another family who all died in a house fire. All 4 of his children, and his previous wife. We all felt bad for him, for suffering such a tragic loss, because we didn't know what he was like behind the scenes at home. We never suspected anything off about that, just thought it was a tragedy. Well, finally my cousin decided to leave him. She took her 2 kids and moved away. She had to leave abruptly, so she was missing a lot of important things, social security cards, birth certificates and stuff like that. One day after things cooled down between her and her ex, she arranged for her to go over to their old house and gather the rest of their things. He asked them to bring the kids because he missed them. Luckily, she decided to let them stay at their friend's house instead. She went over to the house, and he was absolutely enraged he didn't bring the kids. He shot my cousin 4 times and then shot himself in the head. He was planning to do a murder-suicide with the whole family. That's why he wanted the kids there. My cousin was shot twice in the neck and in the face and arm. Somehow, none of the bullets struck any major arteries or anything, and she was able to make it to the next-door neighbor's house to get help. She survived the murder-suicide attempt, and her ex didn't. The whole thing really makes me look at that house fire tragedy a little differently. I was in Navy boot camp in Orlando. I was alone on watch in our company's barracks compartment. I was checking all of the windows because the CC liked to unlock 1 or 2 to make sure we checked them all. That put me between the racks, or bunk beds on the wall. I caught movement down the middle open area of the compartment. A flash of white. White shoes meant brand new recruits. We had been there long enough to know we were wearing our black Oxfords. I went between the racks to the middle so that I could see who had come into the compartment. The outside door definitely hadn't opened, and I would have heard the door by the inside stairwell. The door to the laundry area was locked. Standing across the open area By the other row of racks was a girl with dark curly hair, wearing the same female utilities as me, light blue shirt, black pants, and was wearing the white tennis shoes, which meant she'd been there only a few weeks. She looked at me and then she wasn't there. No place for her to go. We were in the middle of the compartment, yards from the door, and nowhere to hide. I didn't see her move. She was just there one moment and the next, gone. Only saw her for a heartbeat or two. Spookier still, years later, someone was telling us about doing roving patrol watch at boot camp and how they kept finding a pair of white sneakers in the locked laundry room of an empty compartment. It freaked her out. They said that they would then put the shoes outside on the breezeway, then lock the door, but the shoes would be thumping in the dryer when they came back around. She said the red lights always looked darker in there. They'd do their checks and leave as fast as they could. They thought one of the CCs was playing a joke with the shoes. I asked which building, which wing, which floor, and it was my old compartment, exactly the same place I had seen that girl. When I was really small, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends to watch TV until I fell asleep. I really loved these times, and I would stay up later than anyone else, just because I could. One night I was almost asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forth. I was a little scared, so I crept towards the bay windows of my living room and peeked out towards the porch. Sitting on my front porch swinging was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown, covered in blood, and holding a huge kitchen knife. I flipped out and immediately ran screaming into my parents' room, but was too terrified from my words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I was finally able to tell them what I saw, my dad got really angry at me and told me that it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I refused and kept crying and screaming until he'd had enough and snatched my arm and dragged me towards the front door to prove that nothing was there. I kicked and screamed all the way, trying to make him stop, but he kept on pulling. Finally, when we got to the door, he unlocked it, swung it open, and said, "See? There's nothing." To this day, I have never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face when that woman turned and stared at both of us and slowly stood up with the knife. My dad slammed the door shut, got my mum to call the police while he went and got his gun. He went back to the door with a 12 gauge and cracked the door enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me." My dad told her the police were coming and she freaked out, grabbed the knife and walked away. The police found her 15 minutes later, trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. My dad warned my crazy uncle who lived next door what was happening. Apparently he was waiting on his front porch with his shotgun when she walked by. He pointed it at her and just said, "Keep on moving." I spoke to my mum, and she said they never really found out the whole story, but apparently she was crazy and off her medication. Her and her husband got into a fight, and she tried to attack him with the knife, but didn't seriously hurt him. When he got out of the house, she cut herself with the knife, either trying to end her own life or make it look like her husband did it. The police never spoke to us about it, and this is what we've pieced together from other neighbors. I'm a military police officer in the US Army, and have had a few weird and spooky things happen to me on my shift. 1. I was stationed at Fort Riley for my first few years. It's one of the oldest forts in the Army, and was the last stop for people heading west in the old frontier days. Half the post is from that time with buildings made of limestone blocks. I've heard talk that limestone gives paranormal activity more power, but I digress. There's a house there known among the military personnel as the Asbestos House. Supposedly there was a lieutenant that lived there during the Vietnam era, and he'd snapped, killing his entire family, and hang himself in the basement. The Army cleaned it up, and a few years later another lieutenant was living there and killed his family and himself in exactly the same way. The army hasn't had anyone live there since, due to the asbestos, or that's what they say. The issue was that if there were asbestos in the house, every house in that street would have been contaminated as well. But this is the only one that had asbestos in it according to the army. We'd always get calls to the area though. The neighbours would hear noises and see lights go on and off, despite no one having lived there for over 30 years. We'd go in to investigate, only to find no one there, and no signs of anyone being there, apart from our own boot prints in the dust from prior investigations. The whole area gave off a really weird energy. My second story is from Fort Riley, which has two main roads leading from older parts of Post to the newer division parts, where the division headquarters and most unit buildings are. One is called 1st Division Road, and I can't recall the other one where this incident took place. Both these roads have really thick forests on both sides, as well as steep hills. So one day I'm called back to the station to take a statement for a missing person report. A guy comes in and says his wife has gone missing and hasn't been in contact with anyone for a few days. I take his statement and file the report. Fast forward a few months and we get a call for a car wreck off the road whose name I can't remember. An infantry company had been doing a ruck march for morning practice when they smelled something rotten. They did a quick search of the area and found a car wreck off the hill in the forest. We arrived on the scene and found out it was the missing wife. I don't know if you've ever seen a mummy without its wrappings, but that is what this body looked like. The smell was indescribable. The body had bloated and popped all over the inside of the car, and we could only identify the lady because of her ID. As patrols, our primary mission was to just secure the scene and wait for the military police to arrive and investigate. Eventually, they found that the woman had been driving drunk, flew off the road and hit a tree in midair, killing her. The car fell at just the right angle off the road that you wouldn't have seen it unless you were out of your vehicle and actively looking for it. She had been there through most of the Kansas summer and was practically skeletal at this point. It was definitely one of the worst cases I've ever seen. A third story. A few friends from my unit and I were talking about paranormal activity, so we decided to try and do some EVP recordings like we saw on TV. My friend Sergeant Cummings had a high-quality microphone since he streams games on Twitch, and we used that. We went into the basement of the barracks and set up our little outpost and tried to contact spirits. The standard, "Hello? Is anyone there?" and questions like you see on TV. We kept at it for around an hour and a half before we called it a night and went upstairs to go to bed. The next day, Cummins called me and said, "Mac, you've got to hear this." So I came by, and he's isolated several audio clips that we believe to be genuine EVPs. It was so hard to make out, but the three words we heard were Army, Society, and Mississippi. The last one still gives me chills to think about. Why? Cummings was from North Dakota, and I from Mississippi. Working in the third largest building on the planet for floor space. It's about 3 a.m. on a Sunday, and I'm walking down an aisle into the middle of my department. At this time the place was nearly vacant as it was a holiday weekend, and we had only myself and a skeleton crew of maintenance workers under my direction working in another department, all of whom were males. As I'm working by my offices on the plant floor, the power goes out, and the plant drops into the most absolute darkness I've ever experienced. Power gone, I hear the various machines spinning down to rest, and the silence becomes overwhelmingly relative to the background noise I'd gotten used to. The faint sounds of running water become evident in the moments after the blackout, while I'd begun searching my pockets for my phone and the flashlight it offered. As my hand found the phone, a scream erupted from somewhere nearby. muffled and distant. It was the kind of scream you hear from a 5-year-old girl in her first haunted house, as the bloody clown steps around the corner and fires up a chainsaw. It startled me so badly. I immediately dropped my phone into an alternate dimension. The scream continued, a constantly fading note that seemed to be moving away from my position. Panicked and terrified, I fumbled around the dirty floor for my phone and found it seconds before the emergency lights lit up the plant with the eerie glow of yellow light. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I looked around me. Muscles tense. I'm ready to defend myself against whatever this was. I tried to radio a few times before I realized that the power outage meant the digital frequencies were useless without the receiver up in the main office. I started to move through the various production lines towards where I assumed the scream had originated, mind working furiously. I had no women in my crew tonight, and we were the only people allowed in the plant. So where had the scream come from? Details began to press into my mind that I hadn't noticed before. The apparent youth of the voice behind the scream made no sense, and it was a scream of pain, the kind you cannot even attempt to control. It had faded away from my position gradually, and then trailed off, as if she had run out of breath. As I stepped towards 2 products on one of the final assembly lines before a wide open space in the next apartment, the emergency lights dimmed, that audible electricity buff filling the space around me. Struggling to understand what was happening, my senses were again knocked askew when the normal plant lights blazed to life above my head, leaving spots across my vision for a moment and forcing me to raise a hand to shield my eyes. As the shadow crossed my vision, I saw it, or rather, I saw her, only for a moment. She stood there, hands outstretched towards me, a vague outline partially hidden behind one of our products. Dark features were the only distinguishable characteristics I can remember, as my reflexes in that moment had been to blink against the bright lights, and she was gone after that. To this day I have no idea if what I saw was real, or if I had imagined it. No tales are told to the mysterious young woman in the repair hall, not by anyone but myself. No one knows of any deaths matching her description in the area, or ghosts known to haunt the plant. Not a soul has heard a scream in the darkness, not before, during, or after those black pre-dawn minutes. Believe me, I tried to find anyone with information that might explain what I saw, all to no avail. I'm left wondering, with a memory more crisp than any photo I've seen, of that young woman standing in the distance, her arms stretched towards me. Needless to say, I did not revisit the location of said event, ever, because notes don't get any bigger than that. This is a story that my cousin shared. He had joined the army and was stationed as a craftsman, basically a private in the engineering division, and he had signed up as a mechanic for an apprenticeship. They were sent to Thailand for some kind of training and had a weekend off. Naturally, they went and got absolutely smashed at the bar. The night was over, and they were walking back to their accommodation along the beach, when a Thai man walked up to them and pulled a gun. He was attempting to rob them. In my cousin's words, had he not been so absolutely hammered, he would have just given him his wallet and walked away. Instead, his drunken ass wrestled the gun out of his hand and just yeeted it into the ocean. Then he shoved the dude onto the sand and laughed before walking back to the accommodation, realizing how absolutely idiotic he had been the next day. I mean, he was savage and incredibly lucky, but there's a very good chance he could have ended up dead and forgotten on a beach somewhere there. My grandfather was a pilot in the Turkish Air Force way back, and being part of NATO, they sent them to Canada to attend Air Force Academy. Just to give you some context, he is very uptight and serious, Often the reason being a soldier comes into play. He is the reason why I know a lot of astrophysics. He guided me to science and facts his entire life. Rest in peace, Grandpa. Anyway, he told me he and the rest of the school, including the flight instructors, witnessed a UFO hovering above the main building. He says it came too close to the ground and it was basically impossible not to notice. Then, just as baffled as people are, the UFO shot up straight almost instantly. Must be pulling G-force that would have easily killed a human being. I never saw a UFO with my own eyes. Every object I've ever seen in the sky had an easy explanation. Some took longer to realize, but now it comes to me very naturally. I'm a little skeptic about the whole aliens visiting Earth thing, but science says it's not impossible. Fermi's paradox can easily be solved. I also spoke with my mother, as it was her father, and she gave me a few more details that I can remember. It was during the winter of 1958, and after the meal my grandfather didn't like to talk about these things in general. Only after I pushed him hard did he spill more details, but I forgot some of them. Thanks, Mum.
I was in the National Training Center at one of the military's training facilities. There are mock towns and villages here, some rumored to be haunted, which may be true. My platoon and I spent the night at one of these mock towns due to rain and flooding at night. I forgot to mention this is a desert with mountains and hills. Well, we took shelter from the rain in a building that was quite lengthy, and it was 2 stories and had an upstairs patio that also led to more stairs to the roof. As we explored the building as we had nothing else to do, we see furniture and a bit of flooding upstairs and downstairs. After a while we go to bed, and a lot of us were sleeping in the entrance room, and 5 of our soldiers were sleeping in a room towards the back of the building. Come midnight, 30-ish of us were awoken by some loud slamming noises that came every 3 minutes or so. Mind you, there was no wind because all the doors and windows were shut. There's also no electricity in these buildings, so no aircon. The slamming noise goes on for some time, but let me tell you that someone screamed out in anger, and all abruptly it stopped for a minute. Then, a lot of heavy sliding upstairs began to happen. The noise was loud, very loud, as if someone or something was pulling furniture or anything heavy around. No one had the guts to go check it out, because as we always say, that's how they die in the movies. I had this neighbor kid I used to play with, a complete psycho. I was 4 or 5, and he was a year or 2 older than me. One day he convinced me to walk well beyond the distance that my parents allowed me without an adult. He wanted to show me something, he said. We arrive at a small lake. He pointed at the water and said, "Look, there's tadpoles in there. Let's catch some." "We don't have a net. You have to jump in and catch them with your hands." I told him I couldn't swim, but he insisted. He told me he pulled me up if I were drowning. I refused, and he kept trying to convince me, but eventually gave up. Said I was a coward. A friend of my mum saw us on our way back, and my mum wasn't very happy about the situation when she found out. 11 years later, I transferred schools and ended up in the same class as him. I figured my childhood memory of him was exaggerated. We spoke about the childhood memories. He told me how one of our neighbors who was a cop had screamed at him for no reason because he was playing with a cat. Remember this? I told him it was nice to see he had so many friends. He responds, "Friends? They're not my friends, they're kids. I only let them think I'm their friend." I smiled the whole time and figured he was joking. I later told my mum about having met him and she went quiet. I told her that he seemed to have turned out all right and said nothing more. A couple of weeks later I brought it up again. She said, "As a mother, I'm never able to trust that boy, and you shouldn't either." She went on to tell me how I wasn't able to sleep and cried a lot at night when I was a young kid. Reason being that he had told me he was planning on burning down our house and murdering me and our family in our sleep. And about our neighbors screaming at him.
Turns out he was actually torturing the poor cat. After that, I avoided him. Thinking back, his behavior was off even as a young adult. He was clearly manipulative and lacked empathy. I'm pretty sure he wanted to drown me that day and wanted to make it seem like it was an accident. Many of the things he did are the telltale signs of a young serial killer. When I was 17, I was an IHOP server. I absolutely loved working the graveyard shift. The money was good, I had great regulars and lots of fun drunks. Whatever. Well, it's 4 AM and we need to cut our cook on Saturday night. Problem is, it's 2 hours before his wife wakes up, so he has to chill for a few hours in the restaurant or get a ride home. Well, the cook had been doing our manager a favor by coming in, so she asked me to take him home. I asked him where he lived, and he said North Tulsa. Okay, so anyone who knows anything about Tulsa knows that North Tulsa is where all the gang shootings and violent crimes happen. South Tulsa is where all the rich people live, and where we were. Upon hearing this, my manager, who's a mama bear type, is like, no, absolutely do not take him home. I laugh her off, and see that the cook is pretty desperate, so I say I'll drop him off. She looks really disturbed and tells me to hand over my apron with all my cash in it, and she tells me that I can get robbed. Best if they just take my wallet and not the $130+. Cool, whatever, just don't be stupid. I know about North Tulsa, and I know that it's all highways to get to his house, so I go, take him in my huge suburban SUV, and take him to his ghetto neighborhood. I get turned around on the route back, and ended up going to a gas station for directions. I go to a Quick Trip, which is one of the nicer gas stations, and park my car in the front glass door, when I see 2 women at the payphone out front, and don't think much about it. I lock my doors, roll up my windows and get inside, get directions from the dude at the cashier desk, and get back to my car. And the 2 women are nowhere to be seen. So this is how it goes. I get in my car, check my written directions, and then notice something in my rearview window. I turn around, and there are 2 people crawling out from my back seat into the seats just behind me. They knock over a box of VHS tapes that I was getting rid of as they crawl over the seats. I had forgotten that my trunk doors don't lock. My horn in my car doesn't work, but I flicker my headlights right into the Quick Trip, trying to get the guy's attention. These are the women from the phone booth earlier, and both of them seem like they're high on something because they're giggling like nuts. One of them is just reading my VHS tapes out loud and throwing them. The other one, jovial, just insists, "Hey, we need a ride home." So being scared does stupid things to you. Like, I know that this was stupid, and I should have just gotten out the car. But instead, about to wet myself, ask her where she lived. "Just down the road." In the rearview mirror, she looks like she's really messed up on something. Her hair's looking nasty, her clothes are all dirty, and in hindsight, I'm wondering if she's homeless. I keep flicking the lights, and when it seems like nothing is happening, I bolster myself and pull out of the parking lot. Whatever, I'm gonna be just fine. Just drop them off, I say. And then she says, "That's right, girlie." And that makes my skin crawl, and I drive her in the direction she's pointing. So we drive, and drive, and drive. It's dark. The highway is long. And the other one is like, "Ask her for money." I'm feeling petrified. I feel like it's been 10 minutes, then 15, and all they're doing is messing up the back seat of my SUV and telling me to keep going. Eventually we get to this country road, and there's nothing I can identify out here. The roads have potholes, and I'm trying to think fast. I start seeing dilapidated houses and motorhomes. They're taking me somewhere, and I don't know where that is. And just as I'm lost in my thoughts, the The first one leans real close to me between the seats and says, "Are you scared, girlie?" Let me tell you, those 4 words nearly made me wet myself. I slam on the brakes at that. Fear does stupid things, and looking back I can see how dumb that was. But you don't know what to do when you're scared until you're there. She's thrown halfway into the front seat, and the other one is cussing her head off. I start slamming on everything, making my 5'8" self seem as big as scary as humanly possible. I slam the glove box over and over again, and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs that I have a knife and to get out of my car. I have a knife, when in fact I don't have anything. I just started kicking and thrashing and screaming and cussing. It's all kind of this crazy fear-induced mania, and eventually one of them figures out how to unlock the door, and they roll out my car with half of my VHS tapes onto this country road. And with that, I slam on the gas and drive off as fast as possible. I am terrified to turn around, and at some point I find the highway again. I'm still just as lost as before, but I don't stop for directions, and it takes me a good 45 minutes to figure out how to return back to the IHOP. To be honest, I'm so mad at the guy at the cash register, but I don't know what was up. My manager is getting off shift, and she had thought I'd died. I remember being so damn happy to see her. But hell, fear is a stupid thing.
I was stationed at Redstone Arsenal, Huntsville, Alabama, September 24th, 1989, in the Advanced Individual Training Program for Ammunition Specialists. We were sent into the field for our field training exercise later that day in the pouring rain. My battle and I set up our tent at the end of the line, which was located near the edge of the woodline. This was around 8 p.m. Later that night at about 2:30, I woke up and needed to piss. The rain had stopped and the moon was full, and made the field by my tent look blue. As I was urinating, I noticed I wasn't the only one up. I looked into the field and saw a young girl between the ages of 5 and 7 running up the trail towards me. I watched her run past and up the trail into the dark forest. Thinking I must be dreaming, I slipped back into my tent and fell right back to sleep. The next morning I was awoken for duty, and like most men, had to once again relieve myself. I went to the same place as before, and as I was relieving myself, remembered what I had seen that night. I looked into the direction I saw the girl come from, and looked to where I'd seen her run off to. There, up the trail, was a Civil War cemetery. I was totally taken aback, and was telling my battle what I'd witnessed. Other trainees listened and gave their opinions, which was mostly disbelief. But one of the NCOs nearby heard me, and came right over. He asked me to describe the girl, and what time it was. Boy, was he mad. He said that the girl haunts the base, and all the years he'd be stationed there, he'd never seen her. Everyone got quiet and walked away. That night, I had fireguard duty by myself, and no one else wanted to do it with me.
I truly had some messed up neighbors growing up in Russia. My building still had a few alcoholics who would leave and break booze bottles everywhere and piss inside the building. But one man who lived on my floor was infamous in the neighborhood. This guy lived with his mother, who ironically was our building's janitor, although she was nearly fired several times for shirking her duties. This woman made moonshine in her bathtub, which often stank up her neighbors' flats. Her kid began sampling the moonshine early on, and was a full-blown alcoholic and juvenile delinquent by the age of 16. He soon moved on to heroin, and began beating his mother for her tiny janitor's salary for drug money. One time, he nearly put her in a coma, but she refused to press charges or kick him out. He broke into his neighbor's flat once for drug money, and went to jail for that, about 2 weeks I think. We decided to get an extra door for our side of the flat after that. The junkie was a metal grunge fan and wrote band names and Nirvana quotes all over the walls of our already dingy building. Like all the other alcoholics/addicts, this guy pissed absolutely everywhere in the building, even in his own flat. The downstairs neighbors actually had severe water damage because of his piss, and his flat was so foul that the next residents had to gut it completely. This junkie took it to the next level once, and shat all over our floor's hallway when his mother wouldn't let him inside one night. My grandma and the building's other residents demanded for years that this individual be removed from the building to no avail. His own mother, whom he physically abused, defended her precious son at every turn and refused to kick him out or even to send him to rehab. Eventually they fell behind on their utilities and had to relocate to a smaller flat elsewhere in town. They lived there for maybe a year, until, rumor has it, the junkie killed his mother. No one knows what exactly happened, but the junkie was taken away by the cops when his mother died, and he was never seen or heard from again. When I was working as a cop on a military base, I loved working night shift. Didn't deal with 99% of the stuff that day shift dealt with, and what little stuff we did deal with was usually really uninteresting. Well, most every building on base is alarmed, and the alarms are tied right into the desks, so we know the instant they go off. When we get an alarm activation, we close the base, go check the building, pull on all the doors and see if we can get in. If we can, we go into the building and secure it, check all the doors and corners to see if anyone has set the alarm off. Well, one night, I was on patrol with my alpha, or partner, and we get called to respond to an alarm activation at the elementary school. So we go, secure the building, and call in that the building is all secure. No problem, keep patrolling. About 15 to 20 minutes go by, and we get another alarm activation. We get back out there and check, and now there is a maintenance door open that leads into a boiler room. Nothing in it. We close it, lock it and get out. Another 20 minutes and another alarm. We respond. All the doors are still locked and we can't get in. The maintenance door is locked and we call in the all clear. This time, my buddy and I sit on opposite sides of the school and watch to see if someone is coming and yanking the doors really hard to set the alarm off. We sit there and watch. Nothing happens. And right as we're about to leave, another alarm activation goes off while we're sitting there. We inform the desk that we'd like the building manager on site to help us secure the interior and let us in. Bear in mind at this point it's roughly 3 a.m. The building custodian shows up, and we start doing a walkthrough, checking all the classrooms and checking all the maintenance rooms, and that's when we see one of the maintenance doors open with the lights on in the room. Now this room is literally the size of a closet. We walk down there and look in. No one's in it, and that door is locked when it closes. We look in there and find a single footprint of a bare foot made of water. Left foot, as I recall. It appears to have been made by a small child. It freaked the living hell out of us because no one reported a missing child and the entire building was clear and still locked up. No one left. No one entered. And we checked every inch of the damn place. Literally, a 3-hour deep sweep, including ceiling tiles, freaked the ever-loving crap out of us, and to this day, my partner refuses to go into that school. Speaking of which, schools really are spooky when they're empty. I was at Camp Leatherneck, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. We were leaving my room, which was a large room with 8 other guys, to head to the designated smoking area at around 10 p.m. It was dark and clear. I lit up my cigarette as I was passing through the T-barriers, and when I got back on the other side, I saw about 10 or so Marine/Army men looking up at the sky pointing. I looked up and saw 3 red dots in the sky, about the size of what you'd see on an aeroplane, but far apart in a triangle formation, so 1 light at each angle point. We're all looking up, and a second set of lights appear, a little to the left of this one. It was super weird, and at one point the lights from the first set get closer together, then apart again, they completely vanish. To this day, I don't know what it was. It was really cool to witness, though.
I was in Nice, France during the terrorist attack, and the truck drove past me within meters of where I was standing. At first I thought it was an accident and brake failure, until the police started shouting, and there were severely injured and dead people in front of me and bullets popping off. I tried to help a guy who was badly injured, but he died when we pressed on his wounds. Then a policeman showed up and screamed at us to run, so we ran back as far as we could. It was a surreal and devastating night, and I still have PTSD from it.
It was around 1 a.m. and my friend heard a noise outside of his front door. His front yard is really dark, so he looked through the peephole rather than opening the door. He couldn't see anything, but could tell something was below the peephole. He decided to open the door slowly, and as soon as he did, an older lady whose face was covered in blood and only wearing a t-shirt, no underwear or pants, tried to run into his house. He slammed the door on her and called the cops. While waiting for the cops, he kept looking out the little hole on the door, and every so often she would scurry back and forth on his lawn. I wasn't there, but I picture it like the alien at the birthday party in Signs. So the cops finally show up and detain the woman, and they get to the bottom of the story. Turns out the woman was his neighbor, and she was extremely drunk. She'd been drinking and locked herself out of her house and tried to get back in by breaking the windows with her face/hands. Side note, the neighbor no longer calls the cops when my friend has parties.
I am a skeptic. I still think there are plenty of logical explanations to my story. But that being said, if ghosts are real, that would be the best explanation I could think of. So let's get on with the story. I'm taking you back to summer of 2013. I was a Marine deployed to the Helmand province of Afghanistan. I was in the southern part of the province, attached to the platoon of combat engineers who in turn were directly supporting the 2nd Battalion 8th Marines, so upwards of a couple of hundred Marines. My platoon of 42 Marines, therefore, had a lot of freedom, as we weren't directly subjected to the battalion commander of the 2 to 8, and we had our own lot, command operations center, motor pool, maintenance bay, armory, even a volleyball court. We shared a lot with the explosive ordnance disposal, who were way out on the end of the lot. We never really spoke to them, but they were super chill guys, I heard. We'd come out with our respective infantry companies operating. Usually one squad would stay back on Dwyer to man the COC and relax and stock up on cigarettes and dip, as well as sleep in a container with a bed and aircon. I personally hated it. I liked getting nitty-gritty and living in the dirt, and got really bored when I was there, but the gym was sick. Anyway, I'm going to guess sometime in late July or August, I'd been out with the 2 infantry companies for months back to back, and they gave me a month on Dwyer. A death by boredom sentence, if you ask me. The rest of my platoon was out on a mission up far north, with my squad hanging back in Dwyer. So it was my night for Firewatch, and I was there with my senior Corporal W and our platoon guide Sergeant D. We were at the Control Operations Center on our lot. Now I know there's a lot of descriptions going on, but our Control Operations Center was a long wooden structure called an SWA hut. It was in the northeast corner of our lot, which was surrounded by a big 15 to 20 foot tall chain link fence with barbed wire atop of it. The space between the center and the fence was no more than 20 feet from the north part of the corner, and from the east part of the corner, more like 35 to 40, not very big at all. We basically squeezed into the corner. On the other side, we had some tents put up, because sometimes our sister company dog handlers would come and stay the night, so it was mainly for them. So I was at the end of the SWA hut, right by the door opposite of the other door by the other side. You could see straight through the other side of the SWA hut, maybe 50 feet from one end to the other. It was late at night. Corporal W and Sergeant D and I were smoking some cigarettes and chatting, which was rare as they were higher ranks than me, but most of that stuff washes away towards the end of deployment. I can't remember what we were talking about, but we were looking at the center, which had all the lights on, and out of the other end we see someone walk past the door very casually. I remember him being Caucasian, having a trimmed beard, and wearing a boonie, and having an M16. So we pop into action mode and go looking for this person. Sergeant D went to the north side of the 20-inch space between the center and the fence, the side the guy we saw walking towards. Corporal W went through the Command Operations Center, and I went round the southern part. All in all, we linked up on the other side, where we first saw the guy not 10 seconds later, as we had sprinted there. It was that quick. There was no one there. We didn't encounter anyone. Sergeant D would have seen the guy. He literally ran into where he was walking. I highly doubt the guy could have jumped a 20-foot fence and vanished. I looked out into the emptiness outside our lot, through the part of the fence he was walking towards, and saw nothing. Just open desert. We each checked every tent. No one, not a soul. When we met up outside the control center, where we saw the guy, I remember he was wearing tri-color camis, which, unless you are MARSOC, Marine Special Forces, you don't have them, and they're woodland green. This guy had desert tricolors, invasion-era camis from 2001. When I told them this, we all kind of looked at each other like, did we actually see a ghost? Corporal W, having a good sense of humor, said to me, "Well, I'm going to bed. Have fun here alone by yourself," and then leaves. And I didn't hear anything or see anything else after that. Although we shared a lot with some military contractors, one of them just popped in to hang out for a bit randomly, and it made me feel a little bit better. I eventually went to sleep that night because I thought, screw it, if that thing kills me, then it's gonna kill me when I'm not tired. But I never saw the ghost again, and we never spoke of it. It's not like some secret we all buried, it just never crossed our minds and we brushed it off and forgot about it until recently. But the one thing that strikes me as oddly coincidental is that our Command Operations Center caught fire and burnt to the ground one day and a week or so later. The fire started in the same spot we saw the dude walking to, and where he disappeared. It could have been EOD, at the speed of which we covered the amount of ground only to not see anyone, and the uniform he was wearing are the only two things that makes it very possible that it were a ghost, if such a thing, of course, were to exist. This happened during my first year in uni. I lived with 3 roommates at a dorm. A few months into the first semester, one of my roommates had a mental breakdown and attempted to strangle me while I was asleep. I awoke to his hands around my throat, his knee on my chest, and a deranged look on his face. I tried to push him off me, clawed at his face, but to no avail. My eyes started to dim, my hands felt leaden, and I was sure I was going to die. Fortunately, my other roommate wasn't asleep. He was laying under the covers browsing on his phone. The sound from our struggle caught his attention, and after seeing what was happening, he pushed the attacker off me and knocked him to the ground. He then woke up the other roommate, and together they restrained the attacker on his bed and called the university police. They arrived in around 15 minutes, and after we told them what happened, they called the actual cops. My roommate was arrested and taken to a police station. There, he had another breakdown and bit one of the cops. He was transferred to a psychiatric facility after that, and of course, expelled from university. 2003 in Baghdad. My unit came in May, right after the initial push. We took over the compound that looked like an Iraqi base. Anyway, we were setting up sleeping quarters and my unit takes over the old medical building. We can clearly see blood on the stairs, and I'm not talking sprinkles. I'm talking puddles of blood from the unit that had come before us and clearly saw combat in there. A few days go by and I'm laying down on my cot, trying to sleep, when suddenly I feel someone stare at me. I look up and see a soldier that clearly wasn't American. It was an old Iraqi soldier just standing there in the middle of the room. I'm sure it wasn't just me being half asleep, because another one of my friends mentioned it a few days later. It was profoundly creepy.
This happened to me about a week ago. I found a summer job at our local supermarket, and about 2 weeks in I got asked to work the late night shift, which is 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. I accepted, since I was in need of more money and hardly ever sleep early. Everything was fine and dandy until about 3 a.m. when a shirtless, scarred-up guy came into the store. After lingering around the store for a while, he quickly came up to the counter, making intense eye contact with me. As I was about to ask him if he needed any help, he whispered, "Don't you dare move." I didn't hear him at first, so I asked him if he could repeat that. At that point he got agitated and yelled, "Make another sound and I will cut you up." In a swift motion he vaulted over the counter, going to the alcohol section, trying to grab a bottle of whiskey. Thankfully the owner has hidden a baseball bat under the counter. The moment he turned his back to me, I took the bat and swung full force at his knee. He winced in pain and tried to get up. I winded my bat again like I was going to hit him, just to see him pull out a homemade shiv of some sort. I let him get up, and the moment he got back up he swung his shiv at me, lacerating my wrist. I pushed him back with the bat, and he ran for the door and got out. The day after I called the cops and showed them the security camera footage, but they haven't contacted me since. I think it's safe to say I won't be working the late night shift again for a while.
One of my drill sergeants actually has a creepy story from one of his Afghanistan deployments. He was infantry, so being in the field and out of missions for a few weeks wasn't uncommon. One night while sleeping in a fighting position he dug, he felt something nibbling at his feet. He woke up and kicked it off, and what he saw wasn't any type of marsupial, but a little humanoid figure he could only describe as looking just like Gollum. But being in the field with little sleep, he chalked it up to seeing things. A few days later, he and another guy on watch. The other guy pointed out something and said, "What the hell is that?" and pointed at a stone wall in the distance. My drill sergeant looked through his binoculars, and crawling across the top of the stone was the exact little humanoid creature he had encountered nights before. This happened to my mum. A man entered her house just before lunchtime and stabbed her and the maid multiple times. He also kept punching both of them while stabbing them. Eventually he got tired and left. My mum played dead, and then, when she was sure that they were alone, she checked on the maid to see if she was still alive. Both of them survived the attack, but the police never found the guy. The thing is, my mum knows the guy. See, she owns a flower shop and had 2 people working for her. One of them is a nice gay guy, and that guy had a boyfriend. It is the boyfriend who attacked my mum, and my mum told me that he was high and looking for money. It seemed like his boyfriend didn't want to give him money that day, so he decided to attack his boyfriend's employer instead. Since then, my vibrant, outgoing mother became a recluse, and she developed serious health conditions. She is also always in a state of pain, which led to her becoming dependent on pain meds. The meds ruined her livers and kidney, and now she is undergoing dialysis for it. All because some stupid idiot couldn't stand not having a little bit of money for the day, instead of going out and earning it. I'll never forgive that guy. I'm in the Navy,
and about 15 years ago I was standing watch in a submarine engine room. We were underway, and I can't for the life of me remember where to or from, or if we were just making circles. It was the mid-watch, and I sat down to catch up on some logs. That's when I heard a woman's voice. This was long before we had women on subs, and felt the hairs on my neck stand straight up. I got up and looked around to find the others, who were all talking or doing their daily tasks. I thought maybe I had dozed off and dreamt it. I sat back down and heard it again, and it sounded like it was coming from outside the hatch I was sitting under. I said screw this out loud, and went to just be around the other guys on watch. I still get chills just thinking about it now.
I was living on Camp Lejeune for a spill. One night we went out to Camp Johnson and decided to walk through the forestry area of the base. Upon walking, we kept hearing screams and seeing weird things such as orbs, and there was just this overbearing feeling of, well, I can't really explain it. We ended up walking off the path, and that's when we see a woman dressed in white. It was very scary, and I couldn't move any further, so I did the only logical thing and ran. Later I found out that me and my group of friends were not the only ones who had seen the lady in white.
My mum had this neighbour who pretended to be weak from cancer/chemo, so her landlords couldn't get mad at her when trash bins were full and the lawn was filthy. She even went as far as shaving her head and fake a limp, got a cane and everything. Mum baked some cookies and offered to take care of her bins and lawn. The neighbour then spills about her scam. My mum now enlightened about my neighbour, the fault in our stars, bullcrap, and tired of the trash blowing into our yard, called the landlord. The neighbour wasn't happy and would blast music at ungodly hours of the night to get back at my mum. Mum would get frustrated because she worked late and left early, filed a noise complaint to the police arrive, and neighbour claims my mum, an old little Asian lady, punched her in the chest. Neighbour wants her arrested. Mum shows cops our security cam footage, no mum punching, but instead finds the crazy neighbour kicking her 9-year-old daughter out in the middle of the night. The 9-year-old is banging on her door, and my mum comes out to check on the noise and tries to bring the hysterical girl inside at 2 a.m. The neighbour comes out and sprays her with the hose. The neighbour was taken away, and the daughter was sent to live with her father. Some neighbours are the worst.
My mum was incredibly abusive to me, and on one occasion when I was around 12, she came into my room while I was sleeping. She crept over my bed and looked down upon me. I hadn't been stirring. That is when I felt something pierce my chest. She stabbed me with a kitchen knife, puncturing my lung, which I didn't know at the time. Obviously, this woke me up. I just rolled out of bed and ran around the house screaming. Someone on our road noticed and called the police because of the noise. Just before the police arrived, she started choking me and I lost consciousness. I later woke up in the hospital and mostly recovered. She is now in jail. This is not the only time that she tried, but it was the most dramatic, and the only time she came this close to actually ending my life. If the neighbor hadn't have called the cops, I don't think I would have been able to tell you this story today.
This is my dad's story. After he was done in Vietnam, he was stationed at an Air Force base in Greenland. They had bad blizzards often there, and when they came through, the base shut down and every section of the barracks would take roll call. These blizzards are intense. There were cables running between all buildings you attached to a person with carabiners, so if there was a sudden whiteout, you didn't get lost and die. They had people die literally 20 meters from shelter because they got lost in bad weather and froze. He said for about 5 months, every time they locked down for weather, they would hear horrendous screaming outside.
everyone was accounted for, so they didn't risk sending anyone out to investigate, and they wrote it off as an animal. However, every time it was heard, the engine room would be wrecked. Tools everywhere, paperwork all over the floor, tables and toolboxes knocked over. Even one time, a 1,000-pound jet engine had been lifted from its workbench crane and smashed almost 30 feet away. The hangars and engine room had cameras covering every single possible entrance with spotlights that made them clear even in a whiteout. No animals nor people were ever seen entering or leaving those buildings. And then one day, it just stopped. This was not something that they just shrugged off at all. It cost a lot of money and threw a wrench in at least one surveillance routine, which caused a lot of brass from the DoD and CIA to fire down the base commander's neck. This facility, beyond military function, served as a base for a lot of civilian research as well. There was a full investigation using all manner of scientists, engineers, and specialists, and they came up with no satisfactory explanation for what was going on. I do not believe in the paranormal, nor did my father, but this is the only spooky type of story he has from his 22 years of service. No one knows what happened. It was very strange in either way. Hundreds of people wrote reports and documented this. It wasn't some grease monkey scratching their heads and randomly guessing. As I said, I spoke to my mum. These are the things that I missed. After one of these occasions, the U2 in the shop had all of its electronics turned on. Many of the systems in this plane were specially built for this airframe and this particular cruise mission. The systems were complex and archaic. Very few people knew how to operate this machinery, and the only ones on base that could were 2 engineers and its crew. It wasn't a simple matter of hitting buttons and flipping switches and stuff. Another time, 3 barrels of hydraulic fluid vanished and were never found. They doubted the screaming noise was wind because it came in short, irregular bursts, and winds never produced these sounds again. They theorized it was a polar bear, but if it was, its coincidental timing was extremely uncanny. Lastly, Control picked up a bunch of weird interference and anomalous readings that, again, had the uncanny timing of happening only when this was going on, but they were never able to reproduce these errors in a controlled manner. It's creepy, bizarre, and may or may not be supernatural. I'll leave that down to your own judgment.
There was a girl in the village of my parents' vacation home who was known to have mental health issues. My family never judged her for it. Both my parents are teachers and used to deal with slow students that say some wicked things every now and then. When I was 2, my parents went on vacation, and so did that girl's family. The girl was 12. Both families were having lunch together, and my parents left the girl to play with me. When my sister, 9 at the time, went to look for me, I was being drowned in a water tank by said girl, who was just looking at my sister smiling, saying some weird things. My sister screamed and my parents and the girl's family went to the rescue in just enough time to save my life. I have no memory of this, so all I know of the story is from what my family told me many times. I haven't actually ever met this girl. Neither have I ever talked to her family. Both families still go on vacation to the same village at the same time. But my parents cut ties with them completely after this.
This night took place a few years ago, while my father and I were living in a small rural town in Alberta. I was fairly new in this town and didn't know anyone but my dad and co-workers. I had found a job as a key holder in a liquor store that closed every night at 2 a.m. My store was located in between a pharmacy and a grocery store, a place well lit, where I felt safe most nights. Not knowing yet that this town was actually known for its drug problem and random creeps. But anyway, on this particular night, my coworker and I had been working late. We needed to finish unloading pallets of liquor, since we had another shipment coming in the next morning.
and at the end of the night around 3:30 a.m., I told my co-worker that she could leave, and that I was going to take care of closing down the store, which basically meant counting the till and cleaning up, as she was exhausted, and I had the keys of the store anyway. After she left, I quickly finished my tasks, took all my stuff, and called my father. At the time, I didn't have a car, and my dad would come pick me up every night and bring me back home, which was maybe a 10 to 15 minute drive to my workplace. I have an amazing father. In return, I always made sure to be ready and to wait outside the store for his arrival. I didn't want him to have to wait for me, because I knew he didn't have much time left to sleep, as he had to be at work in the morning. I got ready to get out the store, set out the security system and locked the door behind me. Now you have to understand that I wasn't supposed to finish this late at night, and that once the alarm system was on, I couldn't go back inside because the regional manager would receive a security call if I opened the door and the alarm would automatically start to ring, and I did not have the code to shut it, since I never worked a morning shift. This store policy mentioned that if you forgot something inside, you'll have to wait until the next day to get it back. As I was waiting for my dad standing in front of the store, I heard some noises coming from my left. It sounded like someone was breathing loudly. The pharmacy was right next to my store and had these big red columns in front of the entrance, and I thought the noise was coming from around these columns. I looked to my left but didn't see anything, so I brushed it off, thinking that it was probably the wind or just my very tired self imagining stuff. It was almost 4 a.m. after all, and I had worked really hard that evening. After a few minutes I heard the noise again. I started getting nervous. It was definitely coming from my left, and this time I knew that it wasn't all in my head. At that moment I noticed a movement and realized that I wasn't alone. A few meters away on my left, someone was crouched down behind one of the columns, and I could not see his face, only his hands holding one side of the column while he was slowly moving his head to look in my direction. I was terrified, completely paralyzed with fear. I knew my father couldn't be very far away from the store at this point, so I grabbed my phone to call him. My dad answered and I told him to hurry up, and explained that someone was hiding next to me and that I was petrified. My dad said that he was going as fast as he could and told me to grab my keys and get inside the store. I was trying to find them inside my bag when I was panicking too much. My hands were shaking and I couldn't find my keys for the life of me. I felt completely horrified when I realized the man had stood up, still hiding behind one of the columns only a few meters away from me. My voice filled with fear. I asked my dad where he was, and he shouted that he was almost there. I started to slowly move towards the grocery store that was on my right, never turning my back to him. The very tall and imposing man looked at me again, but this time he got out of his hiding spot and started to walk in my direction with the biggest smile on his face. I can still recall thinking that this was it. I was going to die. I was trying to decide if I should start running for my life, or if it was better to face him and fight him if need be. But suddenly, I heard a big noise coming from my right. I turned around and saw my dad driving as fast as he possibly could into the parking lot, honking and turning his high beam headlights on, I believe to startle the man. My feet finally decided to move as I ran as fast as I could and jumped inside my dad's pickup, tears streaming from my eyes. I watched this man look straight up at us and slowly wave at my father for what felt like an eternity. The creepy man started walking closer towards us, and as he got closer, my father finally gets a good look at the man and said, "Oh my God, girl, I guess you haven't met Peter yet." I didn't understand. My father started laughing, tears coming out of his eyes while I looked up at him, still in complete shock. To me, there was absolutely nothing funny about that moment. A few seconds before, I thought my dad couldn't get here fast enough, and that I was going to be murdered right there, in front of my workplace. My father waved back at him, and we drove off slowly. On our way home, he explained that Peter was a very nice man with a cognitive disability. He said that Peter lived in town, and that every morning he would sit inside the Tim Hortons that was located in the same parking lot as my store, and would ask people if they wanted a hug. He apparently did that every day, and everybody in our small town knew him. My dad told me I should probably give him a big hug next time, and I would get a coffee at Timmy's, since I probably scared the poor man to death. Either way, Peter the Hugger, I'm sorry, but let's not meet again. Well, not while I'm alone, outside at 4 a.m.
I was in the Navy and did 6 months in the Mediterranean. I saw a lot of empty boats, but also small boats full of people and other refugee-related events. The one thing that will always stand out, though, was the day we cruised past a dead body. It 100% looked like nothing I'd ever seen in a movie. It was like cottage cheese wearing clothes. I assume, given the region, that the person's skin was much darker before they passed. After death, they were severely bloated and white. Had they not had shorts and a shirt on, I'd have never recognized this as a person. I've also been on Liberty in Greece and passed dead bodies on the beach. The desperation of the refugees to cross the sea, I swear, is something else.
When I was a kid, my father got into a relationship with a rather strange but still kind woman. She had a son who was only a few years older than me. At the time, I didn't really think anything of their relationship, but looking back at it, it was very abusive. They got into fights often, most of them turning physical, even when both me and my father were present. The kid would always try to push me over and hit me, but I would never say anything to my father because I didn't want to ruin his relationship. Now, here is where my memory gets a little hazy. My father and his then girlfriend were having a conversation, while I and her son were a few meters away from them. He once again tried to hit me, at which I sat on top of him to prevent that, as I was a really fat kid and he was very skinny, so despite the age difference, this somehow worked. I told him I would let him up if he left me alone, and since he promised to do so, I just sat beside him. He proceeded to get on top of me and strangle me. I remember trying to cry out for help and reaching out to my father, but not being able to make a single sound and feeling like I was being pulled away from him. I'm pretty sure I passed out after that, or at least was very close to it, because after that, the only thing I remember is that my father's girlfriend and her son were now gone. I never saw them again, though the last I heard of them was from years later, after my dad received an anti-wedding invitation from her. From what my dad told me, she was angry at her son, but even more pissed at my dad for ending the relationship. I'm pretty sure he didn't really intend to murder me, I hope. But then again, what was the intention of trying to strangle a 7 to 8 year old kid? All in all, this was surprisingly less traumatic than you think it should have been. I used to work in defense programming robots. I was stationed at an army depot in the Nevada desert, and we had a 4-wheeled robot we were building to guard the bunkers there. We were never told exactly what was in the bunkers, but I can only assume that they were nukes and aliens. Anyway, the robot had a cluster of cameras on it, including an infrared camera. The infrared was really fun to play with at night. It sensed heat, so you could spot coyotes, rattlesnakes, rabbits, and other desert creatures. One morning I walked into our office, and everyone was crowded round the video console, watching the robot's recorded video from a few hours before. The video started with the robot's usual night drive, its mindless route. Then it picked up something on radar, sounded his alarm and sped over to the radar blip to get a bit closer. When he got there, he pointed his color camera, but there was nothing there. He pointed his infrared, and that's when it got scary. There was a ghost standing in the desert in front of the robot. He looked like an old World War II soldier. He was in uniform, with a rifle and a German Shepherd. The robot kept toggling between the color camera and the infrared, and thus the ghost kept disappearing and coming back. Clearly the robot was confused as well. I'm pretty sure the ghost was confused too. Eventually the ghost decided he had better things to do, so he left. The robot then resumed his mindless route. Just another day in nowhere, Nevada. My neighbors heard me and my live-in perpetrator arguing and struggling, while I was being pinned against the wall and strangled. So my neighbor, being the diligent man he was, called the cops. They came over, but the perpetrator sweet-talked them into thinking it was a misunderstanding, and that it was all over. They left. But one cop had a bad feeling, bless his heart. He told me afterwards, and he waited outside. My perpetrator came at me, dragging a life along the wall, which made a creepy, horror movie metallic sound, and I screamed. It was at that very moment the cop broke down the door and saved me and arrested the perpetrator. He spent 3 months in a psychiatric facility, because they admitted to wanting to hurt me some more. Obviously, the perpetrator was my then partner, and I'm glad that relationship is over. A buddy of mine was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa in the aughties. It was a regular day full of standard base activity indoors and out, when the sirens went off, followed by a warning for all staff to report to the base's mess hall. My friend and everyone else were quite confused but followed orders. Upon arrival at the hall, they found it was full of the base staff, with a uniformed officer taking roll. The base commander settled everyone down and advised them that everyone was just taking a short break, that there was nothing to worry about, and that everyone would be back to work shortly. Everyone sat at the long lunch tables, scratching their heads and discussing what could be up. This particular room in the hall was interior and had no windows. Once the roll was completed and everyone accounted for, the commander left, and soldiers carrying automatic rifle closed the doors to the hall and stood inside them at attention, essentially stopping anyone from leaving. This raised the chatter quite a bit, but nobody panicked. Only a few minutes later, an incredibly loud engine sound could be heard approaching the base, as whatever was making the noise sounds lands, and it shook the entire island. Framed photos fell off the walls and trophies in glass cases are shaken over. The engine hum and shaking then cease. Chatter again rises sharply, as speculation about what the hell is going on increases. After about an hour, the noise starts up again, and the island shakes again, and whatever it was takes off and quickly fades. Shortly after, the base's commander enters and says everyone can get back to work, warning them not to discuss today's break and simply forget about it. When I asked him what he thought it was, he immediately suggested that it was some sort of classified skunk weapon spy plane, maybe the Aurora needing to land for emergency repairs or refueling. Of course, he said, since they kept us all from seeing it, we'll truly never know. This didn't happen to me but my sister. She was working in a retail sales job at a large and popular mall in a city a few years back. One day, she arrived at the mall for work, like any other day. She stopped and went to use the restroom, the ones general mall-goers would use. After using the restroom, she went to wash her hands, when she noticed, in the mirror, that a man was standing behind her. She made eye contact with him and apparently gave him a nod of acknowledgement. The man was apparently holding a garbage bag he had gotten out of the restroom trash can and had fashioned it like a rope. He then proceeded to approach my sister and wrapped it around her neck, choking her and slamming her to the ground. She doesn't remember much, but the security camera showed the man literally choking her unconscious, and then just jump and stomp on her head repeatedly. The man fled, and she was found by another mall-goer, covered in blood. her face badly disfigured. She broke her jaw, lost several teeth. Long-term brain damage is still not known. He tried to kill her. He was a complete stranger, but the police think it was a gang initiation type of thing. The guy is now in jail, and will be for a very long time, and my sister has extremely severe PTSD from it. We were stationed in Okinawa. Oh man, it's a goldmine of stuff. Driving through a tunnel coming back from Churimari Aquarium, I woke up to my friends freaking out. There was this phantom moped that zipped by with this girl on the back, and she left a trail of long flowing black hair like the Grudge ghost, oily looking flowing hair. I thought I was dazed, but we talked about it the next day. I think the story was some girl was kidnapped by guys on mopeds driving through the tunnel when they crashed, construction or another car, and I think they were decapitated or something terrible. Also, I thought I saw a ghost in my room and some other areas. I drank a lot back then, so I passed it off. Cadena was rumored to have a lot of ghosts, Gate 3 I think. I thought it was just an excuse to keep it closed. They also have a bunch of buildings which are allegedly haunted that they still use. I think one of the marine bases supposedly has the ghost of a samurai run up and down the streets. Just Google Haunted Okinawa and you'll find a bunch of stories. They were good times. I have an apartment. This lady lived on the 3rd floor. She must have let her cats piss everywhere, because the entire building reeked like cat piss. The smell entered my apartment frequently. When I passed her in the hallway, I would have to hold my breath because she reeked. I dealt with this for 2 years with multiple complaints to the office, until I eventually called animal control. Turned out, she had 30 cats in her apartment. Animal control took all of her cats away. She was evicted shortly after that. I know from talking to other neighbors that this had been going on for at least 5 years before I even moved in, but they had a hard time evicting her because she was Section 8, although I'm sure the apartment manager was very incompetent as well. She even told us that she had been working there for 6 years, and my neighbors were wrong that it had been going on that long. The maintenance guys had to put on masks and rip the carpet up and seal the wood under it, amongst many other things, to make that apartment habitable for future renters. As a Marine, I used to have the graveyard patrol shift at the Beirut Bombing Memorial. Part of the memorial is dedicated to a veteran cemetery. Oddly enough, I never got freaked out being completely alone in a remote cemetery, in the middle of the night, surrounded by dense wood on all sides. It was actually kind of peaceful, to be honest. However, one night, I was patrolling near the perimeter fence where some of the oldest headstones are, and I heard the sound of a woman humming. I followed the sound and noticed a light glowing through the vines and brush of a large tree. As I approached, I could literally feel my hair begin to lift, as if there were an electric current in the air. I pushed aside the brush, and what I saw next nearly took my breath away. It was an old, weathered headstone, with a large cross etched into the marble. Only the cross was glowing a bright, vivid blue like a neon bulb. The humming was also suddenly much louder, and had a weird plurality to it, like it was coming from 100 voices at once. Needless to say, I freaked the hell out, screamed like a scared little girl, and sprinted back to the parking lot. I radioed the guard who was supposed to relieve me and forced him to come early, then spent the rest of my shift in the cab of his truck. I don't think he believed me, but he stayed in his truck and didn't go out on patrol until the sun was fully up. A few days later, I worked up the nerve to return to the graveyard during the day. As I suspected, in the light of day it was a completely mundane headstone. There was no name, only the aforementioned cross. I ran my hands over the stone to check to see if there was maybe some sort of hidden light source or solar panel, but none. It was just plain, solid, unremarkable stone, and the humming was gone too. I eventually returned to my normal shift, but never again experienced anything out of the ordinary. I never learned whose grave that was either, but I find myself thinking about it from time to time. It certainly sounds absurd when I say it out loud, but I suppose it could have been a hallucination or a trick of my brain, but I don't believe it was. I think it was a real ghost or spirit of some sort, but I don't think it was malevolent in the slightest. A while back I was at my friend's house when a guy came in through the balcony glass door. He had to have climbed up 2 stories of balcony just to make it, and proceeded to start yelling things at her like, "Who is this guy?" And I stood up and protected her. It was dark and I couldn't see the knife in his hand, which he then stabbed me with in the face. I never knew the guy, never even met him, or got his name. After I was out of hospital, and started to try and figure out what the hell that was about, our mutual friend told me that he had asked the perp the same question, and his answer was, "I'm going to murder her." But I didn't know that he was there as well. I'm 23, and this was my second time getting stabbed altogether. 5 stab scars in total. Welcome to Finland. It was winter 2012. I was 18 to 19 at the time and working in a petrol station in an average-sized town in England. It was an okay job, good money for somebody who was at college at the time, and it was just a shame that it was a weekend job. So while my friends were getting drunk and having fun, I was in a petrol station, serving taxi drivers and the occasional drunk. It started off like any other night. Serve people, clean up, do stock and average night shift work, and since it was winter the night was really dark, and you could only see faint outlines of people walking back and forth even with streetlights. The place where I worked was situated across the road from a pub, and had an alley running beside it, leading to a housing estate. Around 3 to 4 a.m. as I finished cleaning a set of shelves, I noticed a figure standing in the alley just out of the light, but just enough to hide his face, but you could make out his clothing. I initially brushed it off as someone waiting for a taxi, as it seemed harmless enough. I sat down in my chair behind the counter and looked at my phone and played some games for a bit. When I looked up, it was 5 a.m, and he was still there waiting, watching me. To make my situation worse, after 5 there's hardly any traffic or passers-by. I had that guttural feeling that he had some harmful intent. I was safe, however, as I was locked in until morning. I stared back in a trance, trying to keep an eye on whatever he would do next. After a while, I needed to use the toilet, so I went and came back thinking he might have walked off, but he didn't. He was still there. I then decided to not do my last job until my co-worker came in to start their shift, as my last job was to take out the fire extinguishers and sand buckets. It got to 6 a.m. and the figure faded back into the alley, and I didn't see him for the rest of my shift. When my co-worker arrived, it was still dark, and I usually walked the 10 minutes back home, but I got a taxi after that shift. I felt that the guy could still be anywhere, just watching me. I told my co-workers and family members about my experience, and they said they personally haven't experienced anything like it, and wouldn't like to either. I was very nervous when doing my shifts from then on, feeling like as soon as I let my guard down he would strike. But thankfully nothing else happened after that, and I quit the following summer to go to university. Safe to say I don't want to meet the person in the shadows from that night. Former USGC here. I saw a ghost and some creepy stuff happen when we were removing the old Fresnel lens from the Presque Isle light in Michigan. Also, I've seen some weird and creepy lights in St. Elmo's Fire near the old Washango light. Compass system radios all quit, radar and GPS wouldn't work either.
The light near Sturgeon Bay is haunted as well, and we stayed at the light near Two Rivers, and the whole family saw the ghost. There are several lights in the Great Lakes that are open to active reserve and retired military members as vacation rentals. We stayed at Rawley Point Lighthouse and the Sherwood Point Lighthouse. They have visitor logs that now look like a diary, and multiple stories in there are about the hauntings, dating back to at least the 70s. I know that Sherwood Point, at the very least, is quite haunted.
I was in Thailand, heading back to my apartment from a popular corner of the bars in Chiang Mai. I went down the same streets and alleys I always did, cutting through the center of the city to the edge of the moat by the Ram Hospital. I passed by the technical college and saw a group of guys hanging out on the corner. I didn't think anything of it as I entered the final alley that would put me at the moat of my apartment. 2 mopeds passed me and went into an alcove to my right. As I passed it, they zoomed out and cut me off. It was at that moment that 4 guys hopped off their bikes and one approached me. "Where are you going?" he asked, and then punched me in the face. I stood there stunned, thinking, did he just really punch me in the face? I look up, and his arm has something in it. In a swinging motion, I did the only thing I thought of at the moment, and put my arms up to protect my face, and I yell out. After several blows to my arms, I turn and run, but his buddies were there to stop me, cutting off my escape. After a few minutes, they hopped on their bikes and dipped. I have no clue why. Maybe it was the yelling. But I looked down at my arm. My left arm below the wrist was cut halfway through. One of the bones was completely exposed, marrow and everything. My hand hanging uselessly at the end. I knew, immediately, I was in deep trouble. I didn't even feel a thing. I have a minor medical training, so I took note that no arteries were severed, but I was bleeding profusely and needed help. I went to the guest house nearby and asked the attendant for help. Poor thing looked faint when she saw me. She got me in her car and took me to the RAM hospital 100 yards away. Turns out the guy swung at me with a machete according to the doctor. I thought it was a cane or rod. So that's my story. It's important for me to say that I stayed in Thailand for about a year after this event, despite my pleas for me to get out of there and come home. I wasn't about to let that ruin my life. Anyway, I have full function of the arm and hand now. After 4 years of drinking to bury the memory, I'm happy to say I started therapy 6 months ago. I quit drinking entirely and was diagnosed with PTSD, obviously. I'm finally addressing the demon who's been hiding in the depths of my mind, and he has his days numbered. I used to work on a submarine. There are few things as unnerving and wondrous about the engine room, from 2300 to 0500, alone on watch. When the boat is largely shut down in port, it becomes very quiet. The roving watchers usually make it an hourly game to speed through their log rounds, especially in the lower levels. One particular in port period, the boat was moored in Pearl Harbor, and a few people started complaining about feeling really uneasy. I was on mid-watch as the SEO on evening and senior chief came back to do his required 3 a.m. tour. We saw him walk past, maneuvering on his way to Shaft Alley. That particular senior chief was the crusty old salty type, and would usually spend a bit of time just sitting in the lower levels of the engine room alone to contemplate life, so we expected as much. What we didn't expect was to him to literally run into the maneuvering area a few minutes later. The man was pale-faced and breathing heavily. We sat up straight, our eyes wide, thinking he was about to have to announce and fight some ship casualty. He slumps into the Edo chair. A few tense but silent moments go by.
We're on pins and needles. He finally opens his mouth to tell us he saw a ghost in the shaft alley. Swears a sailor passes by him as he's sitting on trash in the shaft alley. His first response was to call out to the guy to see who it was, but then he realized he wasn't dressed right. He described what the guy was wearing, the old World War II naval uniforms, so he quickly gets up and catches up to the guy. And he does. Catches him all the way up. The guy turns towards the senior chief, looks right at him, then turns away and literally walks through the arse end of the boat. It's now that the senior chief decides it's time to leave Shaft Alley, and promptly does so, swearing up and down that he knows what he saw. I sure as hell wasn't about to leave maneuvering that night to find out for myself. I was attacked in a friend's house by an ex-husband. He slit her throat and smashed my face with a box cutter before hitting me over the head with a plate, knocking me out temporarily. He then lit the place on fire with us in it. I managed to wake up and drag her outside, and a neighbor called the police and ambulance. They caught him 2 days later, trying to end his life in a Ramada Inn. We both lived through it, and he is now serving a life sentence. I grew up in an old Victorian-era boarding house in Ivor, South Carolina. Everything about that town and house and its surrounding area is just creepy. We saw and felt all kinds of weirdness in there, but that's only the beginning of my experiences. Hot spots, cold spots, apparition of a man who looked like he was dressed in a suit and a fedora, who always was with a young woman who was wearing a dress like an old school teacher from when the house used to be a boarding house, and the ghosts of people that had been lynched from an old pecan tree in my backyard. I'm used to seeing some messed up stuff at this point, and that's only part of it. Fast forward to 2014. I was enlisted into the US Navy and got assigned TAD to USS Sturret in between my A and C schools. I was coming back to the ship one night, and I see someone aloft. That's not right, no one's supposed to be aloft at night, but somebody's probably got an okay from it somewhere, so whatever. I see them walking around, then I get up to the brow, look up, and see no one. Guess they went in already. Didn't think anything about it, and the next morning we go underway. I went up to the smoke deck late one night, on that underway, and on my way there I see the upper half of a guy's face. I could see coveralls with his second-class crows visible through the porthole window of one of the airlock doors that you go through to go outside. I make eye contact and shuffle over to let him in. He shuffled over too. Okay, I'll open it, guy, whatever. I open it, look around, but don't see him. Maybe he went for another cigarette. I climb up there and see some other people in the dark, faces occasionally lit by the cherry from their cigarette, but I don't see the guy. I ask if anyone saw someone come up, because there was a guy that was about to hop through the airlock, but didn't. I just wanted to make sure he was okay. You saw him too, huh? Yeah, of course I did, I say. Is the guy here or what? Do we need to call man overboard? No, he's dead. Maybe not if we don't turn this around. No, another guy goes. I mean, he hung himself. What? Apparently, he was a control too, that got into a love triangle that went bad and he couldn't deal. So yeah, that happened. I was told to come over here and look up by one of the guys, and was shown the exact light he hung himself from. Apparently sometimes you can see him walking around there at night, and you always feel the cold spot right there. And I was shown where. Screw me. Anything else I ought to know, I asked? Yeah, let me show you Andrew Sterrett's sword. It'll always shock you though, no matter how many times you touch it. Or if you touch something metal beforehand. Apparently he killed a kid with it. Yeesh. Oh, you're a sonar tech, right? Yeah, man, I'm in our dive right now, but yeah. Okay, go ask Chief Moon about the skid. I think she's in sonar right now anyway. Okay, I'll bite. I head back down and go to the sonar room. Chief Moon was there and I ask her about the skid. Hell no, that place freaks me out. Okay, but why? What's the story? I want to know.
Well, I went down there one time to get pressure readings because I was an STG-1 at the time and was on duty. I saw a guy standing in the corner, back-facing the ladder. I asked if he was okay and he didn't reply, so I booked it. Screw that. I never went down there at night. But wasn't somebody just messing with you? It sure as hell wasn't anyone that I recognized, so you tell me. And that's why I stay the hell off there. I left a bit after that, and figured that I'd check up on the skids anyway to see for myself. I got down there, and when I touched the hatch, I felt the same weirdness from when I was a kid, and I went in anyway. Cut on the light and didn't see anything, but still felt that something was off. Everybody else that I asked said that down there is creepy, and they don't go anywhere near it unless they really have to. Those are just a few things I saw there. My old ship, USS Princeton, chased a UFO off once, off the coast of Baja, and I saw some sort of submerged disc thing on sonar once. That, and any time that we'd go over shipwrecks, I would get a weird feeling out on the smoke deck. Anyway, that's enough for now. I've got to get back to work.
Allow me to preface. At the time I was working nights in the munitions storage area, which is fenced off with barbed wire fencing. The whole area is pretty spread out, with multiple buildings and definitely large enough that you generally drove around to get to other buildings. Due to the nature of the job, the buildings are spread out with clear spaces between them. Anyway, the only people in the bomb dump on this night are the roughly 8 or so of us in my shop, and one guy in control that night. He was in another building, so we had a direct line to him on what we called the bat phone. This was in summer, around 2 or 3 a.m., and the air was very warm and very still with no breeze at all. And we all had the break room door open while we watched a movie. We were on flight line support standby and nothing was going on. Now the rumor was the small building we worked out of had been built by German prisoners of war during the war, and I know for a fact that there were some back then. It was small, with a main break room, small dispatch office through a doorway, and a couple of offices off that one. There were 2 doors, one in the break room and one on the same side of the building in the dispatch office, roughly 20 to 30 feet away from each other. Both had push bars on the inside, but only the break room door could be opened from the outside, as the dispatch door external latch was busted and only the internal bar worked. While all of us, minus the guy locked down in the control building for security, are in the break room, when suddenly a loud ka-thunk, loud as hell from the dispatch door in the next room. It was like someone was rushing through, slammed the push bar, and the door swung open, and then swung back shut after a few seconds with a slam. We looked at each other, and started to check it out. We had mag lights in our crew books, so a few of them grabbed them, and swept around the building from both directions. Another guy calls the controller on the bat phone, who picks up and denied that he was messing with us. There was no way he could have messed with us and made it back to his phone in time, let alone doing it without being seen or heard. Anyone with experience knows how sound carries at 3 a.m. in summer. You could hear the code keys being pressed hundreds of yards away, no joke. No way he hoofed it back to the building that fast, gone through all those halls, punched in his key code and got back to the phone in seconds. But the thing that got me was the damned bar. The door simply did not open from the outside, and we all heard the bar get pushed in hard. The door swings open, hangs there for a few seconds and shuts. There was absolutely no breeze, and had there been, it would have blown past us, sitting right in front of the door. As an aside, there would be a random time where I would go to pick up a trailer or something behind one of the other shops at the far end of the bomb dump. As soon as I stepped out of my truck to do inventory, I would get a super bad vibe, and I'm talking the heebie-jeebies, like no other. And as best I can describe it, it felt like something was right behind me and just hated me being there, just seething anger, rage, and hate, and it wouldn't go away until about 15 minutes after driving away from that building. One night, another driver who had arrived there shortly before I had a trailer asked if I had a weird feeling there, which I sure as hell did, and he corroborated it. All of this was on mid-shift, which was 11 to 7 a.m. I heard a few other people's stories about weird stuff that would happen at night, but since they're not my stories, I can't vouch. The only other things that happened to me was I swear I caught the clear silhouette of a guy walking in an open field between igloos. As I turned to punch in my gate code in the corner of my eye, I distinctly caught the motion of 2 legs and an arm sticking out, like someone mid-stride. But when I turned back, I saw no one. It might have been my mind playing tricks on me, but man, that place can be creepy. It's been 15 years now, and I still get chills just thinking about it.
I used to work in a bakery fairly early in the morning. My shift meant I had to come in at 3 a.m, and it often meant I'd be the only person there for a few hours, preparing the breads and whatnot. We opened at 7, so time was precious trying to set everything up for the morning rush of customers when everyone else got there. One of the things that really got to me, though, was the fact that I'm convinced the bakery was haunted. I'd only just started working there when I'd hear slight taps by the fridge. I'd look over to see if I had put something askew and that it was going to fall off, but there was never anything there. The noise persisted for a few weeks and then slowly died away, like whatever had done it had grown bored. But the real horror was a few months into me working there. It was roughly 4 a.m. I hadn't had a lot of sleep, as my boyfriend had been over that night, and we'd been watching movies late into the night, much to my regret. I remember groggily kneading my dough while listening to something on the radio, when all of a sudden a blood-piercing scream came from the toilets. It sounded like that of a young boy. That woke me the hell up. I instantly stopped what I was doing, instinctively brushed my hands on my apron, and started making my way towards the toilets. I shouted out tentatively if anyone was there, but I couldn't hear another thing. Now, this place is small, and it took me a whole 3 seconds to get to where the toilets were located after I put my hands all over my apron. No one. I sat on one of the chairs near the toilet area behind a wall to see if anyone was going to emerge, but nothing. I grew bored, washed my hands and had a good look around the place but couldn't find a thing. That really freaked me out. I went back to my duties, thoroughly creeped and had the music on high the rest of the time before anyone else arrived. I really wanted to ask one of my co-workers if they'd ever heard anything. So I went to one that I got along with really well and asked her straight up if there was anything spooky that happened here at the bakery. She gave me a smile and asked if I'd seen the little boy yet. She said that she'd seen the boy a few times while closing and asked if I'd seen him too. I shook my head and said that I heard something. She commented that he's quite vocal at night and to not be frightened. I quit shortly after that. Too spooky for me.
When I was living overseas, a man broke into my apartment. He came through the window of my studio apartment about 5 to 5:30 in the morning. Thankfully, I was awake. He started to go attack me and strangle me, and I was able to fight him off, getting up to my feet onto his chest and pushing with all my strength. This happened a few times. The only thing that he would say is, "You die," repeatedly. He was slender, and I don't think he was very prepared, and I didn't think he would have expected me to fight back. Partway through this, when I realized that he wasn't giving up, is when I really started to get scared, and think to myself that I needed a plan to get out of there. My friend lived next door, so I decided I was going to make a run for it. Once I stood up, he backed out of the window. I grabbed my glasses and my phone and ran to my friend's apartment. Thankfully, she was awake. I told her what happened and she was like, "You have to call the police." By this time, shock was starting to set in for some reason and my brain was yelling, "Okay, so nothing happened here, I'm fine." But she kept reiterating I needed to call them. So, I decided to call one of my co-workers who spoke English really well and ask her.
The co-worker was horrified at what happened and called immediately, and said that she was going to call the police for me and call me back. Once the police arrived, she acted as a translator to tell them exactly what happened. But I really hope he never tried that again. This happened to me when I was a young Girl Scout, probably around 6 or 7 in the early 2000s. My group and I were going door to door to sell cookies, and we were all walking in groups of 2 to go up to different houses, with the adult leader at the very back of the line. My partner and I went to a house with a woman who answered. She was probably in her 50s and wearing a long, old-fashioned nightgown. We asked if she wanted cookies, and she said yes, but that she would have to grab her wallet. She asked if we wanted to take a step inside while she went to get it, and we said that would be fine. The adult leader was nowhere around at this point. I assumed she was lagging behind with some of the other girls. Then she said something along the lines of, "Oh, I have some cats in the basement. Do you like kitties? Do you want to see the kitties?" And I love cats. Even to this day, 20 years later, they're still my favorite animal. So I begin to take some steps towards the basement door, which was open, and I see the dark steps going down. Just as I'm about to take the first step down, I feel a hand yank back at the coat that I was wearing, around the neck area. It was the adult leader of the group. She was yelling at the woman as she pulls me and the other Girl Scouts out the house. Not sure if I would have been murdered that day. I have a brief memory of the woman apologizing profusely, saying stuff like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't even consider that." But after reading many true crime books and consuming content like this, I know now how unsafe it actually was to go door to door selling cookies. It makes me pause and think about how badly that could have turned out for me. I'm an Air Force member. At my old base, McChord Air Force Base, there is a building known as the Castle, and it is the main hub for the base. I worked there for 4 years, and I experienced something on 2 occasions. The first, I had stayed up late to finish some work and emails, and I was the last one in the office. From down the hall I heard talking that sounded like my supervisor and another airman speaking. I walked down that way on my way out to say bye, and as I turned the corner the talking stopped and no one was there. I hightailed it out of there. The second happened at my desk. I had gone in on a weekend to work on a project, and while sitting at my desk I heard a male's voice whisper out, "Get out," into my ear. I was completely alone, and I have never been more freaked out in my life. I never worked in that office again. When I was in Israel, I saw something. My folks and I were chilling about 10 p.m. enjoying the cool evening looking at stars when they became obscured by a giant black triangular shape that passed over. I said, "What the hell is that?" We all looked and waved, and it spotlighted the entire city block as if to say hello back. Or was it getting a better look at us? It made a quiet hum as it passed and turned west, moving very slowly. I was on one rooftop, on post, with another Marine, and on the building next to mine was a dude smoking a cigarette. I looked at my partner and mentioned it, but when we looked again he was gone. The roof access door for that building was very rusty and loud, so there's no way he snuck out in those few seconds. So, I don't understand how he just vanished into nothingness. When I was in my early 20s and living in Chicago, I wasn't making much money. When I found this apartment, it was too good to be true. The top floor of a duplex with 6 rooms for $775 a month. The agent who showed me the apartment stressed it to me that the landlords were very religious. I didn't have a problem with that, even if it did sound ominous. The landlords were an elderly couple that lived downstairs. They seemed okay at first. When I saw them in the yard, they'd smile at me. I took good care of the house. Then, when they saw I was having my boyfriend over, things really started to get weird. One day I was in my office writing when I heard a knock at the door. I open it, and it's the old lady from downstairs. Before I can say hello, she says to me, "Have you ever gotten an abortion?" I shut the door in her face. No thanks. This was a colossal mistake. The house was laid out kind of weird. There was a door at the bottom of a flight of stairs that I thought led to a communal laundry room. But after accidentally opening it once, I discovered it led directly into my landlord's living room. And I learned this the hard way. I was in my kitchen cooking. My boyfriend was at work and I was by myself when I heard what sounded like the click of a door. "Okay," I say out loud. "What the hell was that?" I really didn't make the connection. It could have been the door that led to their living room. I walk into their hallway and look around. I didn't see anyone at the end of the hallway, and I poke my head into all the rooms and no one's there. Then I look down the staircase leading into their house, and the neighbor lady is standing there staring at me. I scream. She flinched and stepped back into her apartment and swung the door shut. After that, every time I left the house, and I spent every possible moment out of the house after the incident, I would come back and something would have been moved. A window would be shut. Once the shower was dripping and my towel was damp. I couldn't lock the door because since it was technically a door to their house, they were the ones with the key. The knocking got so frequent, 3 to 4 times a day, that me and my boyfriend propped up an old mattress so that we wouldn't hear it while we slept. The second to last straw was when I opened the door for work and the stairs were gone. I physically could not leave my house because there were no stairs. They had been dismantled and were sitting on their porch. I called them repeatedly, but they didn't answer. Finally, their son came out of the house and explained that they were remodeling their porch. He told me that I had to cut through their apartment downstairs. I descended the stairs and opened the door, and they were both sitting at their filthy kitchen table staring. The phone was in the cradle. They must have heard it. They kept staring at me with this blank look on their face. I crossed their kitchen and left from the back door. A few days later, I came home from my job and noticed the bathroom floor was almost completely flooded, like someone had left the faucet on or the shower on. The old woman, seeing that I had come home, came upstairs and knocked, screamed at me that I had flooded the bathroom and that her son had come to fix it. I was so run down at this point that I told her it was okay. Her son comes by a few hours later and he is stupid drunk. I open the door and tell him that I need an hour or so before he comes, and he picks something up and swings it at me. It was a massive wrench. I somehow duck out of the way and he stumbles over, and I book it down the narrowly repaired stairs as quickly as possible and call the cops. They come by and take down a complaint, but claim since there was no physical contact they couldn't do anything. I later learnt that the old couple has a daughter on the force. In the middle of the night, me, my boyfriend and several of his friends packed all of our stuff into a Chevy Astro. We lived in hotels in the van for a month, until we found another house. They never attempted to contact us again.
I got to my first unit in the army after basic combat training and AIT. A buddy from basic got there at the same time, and we were put in the same room. The building was about 3 years old, so it was modern, 2-bedroom, shared kitchen on the left and bathroom on the right. My room, and then back to the left. Homie's room back and to the right. His door had this official US Army crime scene tape around the edges. Being curious fresh privates, we asked the senior specialist what it was about, to which they would just skirt around any kind of answer and leave. Fast forward a few months, Homies moved into his new platoon hallway, and my Navajo buddy from basic moved in. By this point the crime scene tape was removed. He's a traditional Navajo, fairly spiritual type, and starts telling me he gets odd feelings from the room. I'm kind of creeped out by it, because of all the tape, but not terribly worried. Fast forward again, probably about a year in the same room. Homie is at an early morning appointment. I wake up and do my pre-private grooming.
His door is slightly cracked, which isn't unusual for him. His toothbrush is left by the bathroom sink, which he usually keeps in his room. I don't think anything of it. He must have just been in a rush, I tell myself. I do a solid of putting his toothbrush where it usually sits in his room and leave the door in the same position I found it, about an inch open. I go back to the mirror to start my shave, when in the reflection I see his door slam open, slam closed, slam open, and finally crack about an inch to where it started. I immediately left and got an arse chewing for not shaving. I went on a third date with a guy I met online. Everything up to this point seemed totally normal. We had talked for months before actually meeting due to the pandemic, so at this point I'd almost known him for 6 months. After the date, I invited him over, and honestly my intention was to sleep with him that night. But once we got upstairs I just wasn't feeling it, and told him I wanted to wait. He agreed and said he thought he should go. I walked him to the door, but when I turned around he pushed me up against the wall and started being really rough. I thought he was joking, until he pulled me to the ground and pinned me. Once I realized what was going on, I started and struggled like hell. His eyes turned black, and I could tell he was enjoying seeing me scared, so I tried negotiating, begging, crying, and fighting. He was like a robot on autopilot. At that point, to stop me from struggling, he just started to hit me as hard as he could in the face and head, and I played dead until he stopped. He was so turned on by this act, and it took a split second for him to just get up and leave me there thinking I was either unconscious or dead. I reported it. They got DNA, but he was never caught. Turned out everything he told me about himself was fake, and his phone was a burner. To this day I have no idea who he is or if he'll ever come back to hurt me again. I just had bought a condo, so I didn't want to move, but seriously considered it. Luckily, the building was already in the midst of having more security cameras and additional security measures installed. I got an alarm system, even though my floor is elevator locked and needs a fob to access, but you can never be too careful. Ladies, please be careful while online dating. I guess the moral of the story is make sure you really know someone before being alone with them. Ask for ID, Google them, check their names and details add up, do a criminal record search, and don't be afraid to ask. It's not rude or weird. It's better to be safe than dead. I was taking my shift in the guard tower at our fire base in Afghanistan one clear night. Through my night vision I saw something hovering above an LP/OP we had about 1 kilometer from our base. It appeared to have lights on the edges of a triangular craft, and it looked like it was dropping flares over the guys. However, without the night vision I couldn't see the craft or the flares at all. I radioed in, and they said that they couldn't see anything. The craft and the flares then vanished. I also saw a very large circular craft without lights pass over FOB Ghazni that was being chased by a bunch of choppers, and a guy that glowed when viewed through my night vision stepped into a bush in an empty field and vanished. I was a young sergeant in 2006, stationed at Fort Bliss. Right outside of Fort Bliss was a training area that was near the Biggs airfield. We were guarding some equipment overnight, so the company wouldn't have to stay. It was me and one private. I told him he would take shifts patrolling, and since we weren't allowed to have cars out there, the other would nap in his car. I woke up to my soldier knocking on my window in complete panic. It scared me at first. Private: "Sergeant, wake up! There's a UFO out there!" "What?" The private points in the direction, and I sure as hell see these lights that seem like they were floating around and then vanishing. Took me a moment as I'd just woken up. That's the Franklin mountain range. You're looking at the cars driving on the scenic route. The cars would be visible and then disappear when they went around the corner, only to turn to appear again when they came back round. I was very agitated at first, but by the next day,
It was by far the funniest experience I'd had while at the military.
I spent about 6 years in the Navy and had quite a few odd paranormal experiences while there. I lived in 2 different barracks while I was there and had friends in another building. All 3 of them had weird goings-on. The first one was in a room shared with one other girl. My bed was against the left-hand wall, and on the right-hand wall were the doors to the bathroom and a double set of closets with mirrors on the doors. I remember waking up more than once that night to see what I thought was the dark outline of a shadow in the mirror, sort of standing close to the bed. On other nights I could see a shadowy figure moving in the bathroom. The second building was much nicer. I had a room to myself but shared a joint kitchen and bathroom with the other person. Though I didn't see anything in that place, she and I could both hear things moving around the other person's room when there shouldn't have been anyone there. And no, it wasn't the cockroaches, though we did find some gnarly big boys dead in the bathroom. The third building was one in which a couple of friends lived. They both did not know each other, but confided to me separately that they had eerily similar dreams of something that lived in the walls and would tap against them. Both of them claimed to have seen shadows moving around their room. So one of the buildings that I worked out of was the only remaining wing of what had been, back in the day, the Naval Hospital Pearl Harbor, way back when it was first constructed. It was this huge building, with 2 long wings several stories high and a gnarly basement. Now it's just one dilapidated building in a parking lot. Knowing that it was a hospital in Pearl Harbor, I'm sure you can piece together the history. But let me elaborate. During the attack on Pearl Harbor, it was used as triage and as a morgue. Several hundred bodies were brought there within the first several hours alone, for later identification and burial. 960 casualties to pass through on that one day. And fast forward to now. There is a 24/7 watch stood up in the building, and that includes the usual stuff, sitting at the desk, answering phones, going on roves, which is all well and good until it's after hours, and only you and a few other people are left in the building, and you're the sad little E3, E4 who has to rove alone. You'd be the only one in that specific part of the building, and would hear footsteps, muffled voices, and get really uncomfortable feelings of being watched. People complained about getting their hair tugged in the basement. In the hour span between 2 roves, I once had the shower in the basement male locker room turn on. I heard voices, disembodied coughing, the footsteps, cold spots in weird places, a horrible feeling of being watched, and after that I never used a specific drinking fountain, and I found out later that it was a problem area, and a lot of people had a similar feeling too. There was also the time that I was locked in the bathroom by a phantom. That was fun. There are also some buildings on Ford Island, which are definitely creepy. I think what makes it worse is that they are abandoned, and a lot of the buildings still have damage that was never repaired. Though I have to say the spookiest thing that happened to me on Ford Island was when my dad visited. We were driving around and he insisted on stepping out of the car near the brig, you know, for the photo op. I was working in an ice cream / fast food / grocery store when I was 18. Wearing headphones and doing dishes when a ragged middle-aged man caught my attention. He was enraged from a high-speed wreck, and he had come into the front of the store. Carrying a broom and a knife he had grabbed while in the restaurant. He caught me off guard and wrapped his arms around my neck and dragged me to where the whole lobby can see and shouts, "This boy's gonna die tonight." An off-duty cop happened to be in the lobby and begins somehow trying to negotiate or something while women are screaming and running. The man dragged to the back of the store in a corner where he forces me to lay directly on top of his body and shouts demands at the cop. He told me to scream out for help. He half-assed fish-hooked me, fake eye-gouged me, and smeared his blood all over my face. Eventually I see a SWAT team show up, and they're peeking through the shelves with big guns. For a brief moment, my captor had to rearrange his grip on the knife, so I took a risk and disarmed him with a quick hand twist and slid away between a nearby officer's leg. He was shot 3 times immediately, and I ran outside. The whole thing lasted between 35 to 45 minutes. I always felt that this incident had a bit of a suicide by police angle, because the man didn't even cut me. He fake eye gouged me and fake fish hooked me, all to look threatening and dangerous even with guns aimed at him. And in my heart, I felt somewhat sympathetic. He seemed so desperate. Also a police violence angle. Ultimately, I disarmed the man fully and escaped before he was shot. And also the particular officer that pulled the trigger had shot a dog in the past. The whole thing started in a different county, and the police allowed the high-speed chase to cross county lines before he eventually had a high-speed wreck in front of the ice cream store. So I served in the Marines from 2014 to 2016, and did 1 tour of Afghanistan. My best friend and I, Lance Corporal Sean Trevors, were stationed together in Camp Dwyer for a short amount of time to help with standard survey and watch. One day we went on a route convoy to deliver supplies to a unit about 30 kilometers away. Long story short, we came across a building while a sandstorm was developing towards the west. We were ordered to seek shelter until the sandstorm passed. Now when I say building, I mean this was a building that looked incredibly out of place. We were essentially in what I would call a small valley, and the nearest village was 3 to 4 clicks away. After about 10 minutes, we scanned the building and found no civils or combatants. 2 Marines were outside standing near the wall that was in front of the building, and 2 were on the roof, while the rest of us ate some chow and were just chatting on the 2nd floor. There were 4 floors, by the way. Then we heard shots fired, the same over the radio. We scrambled and got our gear. I went to the window, which was next to a door leading to a balcony of sorts. After what seemed like hours, we finally stopped hearing fire and received the cease order. We were told to check ammo and for wounded, and to check the eliminated targets. I went to go look out for Sean and couldn't reach him on radio. I looked through the entire building and couldn't find him. I went to my squad leader and I was told he was last seen at the corner wall near the left of the building. I am sorry to say that I did find my friend and called for a corpsman, but was unable to stop the bleeding that was coming from his neck. I did everything I could to keep him alive. I applied pressure and tried to keep him conscious, but unfortunately I had to hold my nearest and dearest friend in my arms as he took his final breaths on Earth. I held him for as long as I could, before the corpsman finally told me he was really gone, and I watched over his remains until we got to base. Now that the sad part is told, I can tell you the paranormal part. It's been 6 years since my friend and fellow brother passed away, and ever since I left country and left the Marines, I've seen him in my dreams. And while I've been awake, I feel like I'm going crazy, but I also feel like it's my PTSD causing me to hallucinate. But I see him not in a bad way sometimes. I see him in dress blues, or Charlies sometimes. I occasionally see him with his Texas rodeo, complete with cowboy boots and hat to match, while dripping Copenhagen straight, or while in full combat gear with his M16. One day I was sitting in the kitchen eating dinner with my wife, who was 6 months pregnant, and I hear clear as day the word, "Hi," as if someone were inches away from me right near my ear and whispering it. I recently saw him at the grocery store of all places, and he gave me a half salute and walked and faded away. I don't know if he's maybe a sort of guardian angel now watching over me. Either way, I want to feel really open-minded about people's opinions about whether I'm seeing things, or whether I should go lock myself in a nut house. I work for a medical examiner, and used to be on the graveyard shift alone. The first night I was on, at midnight on the dot, our air systems shut off, which caused the vents to warp. That sounded like someone running through the vents in the ceiling on all fours.
Thankfully, I got used to it, but it definitely was creepy at first. Another night we lost power, and stupid me watching a horror movie, working so hard, almost crapped myself when everything went dark, and knowing that a room with about 30 dead bodies in it was walking distance away. That one, I stayed in my car for. Not to mention the constant, long, dark, red-lit hallways. Glad I'm not an overnight worker now.
I worked in Arlington National Cemetery while I was in the army. The tomb guard always talked about seeing or just hearing soldiers marching some nights. We were cataloging graves one night, when I thought I saw a soldier in my team up ahead, so I called over to him. He answered from behind me. When I looked back, the other soldier was gone. I'm a skeptic, and I believe everything paranormal has a real-world explanation, but I'm still trying to figure that one out. I was stationed while in the Navy at El Centro, California. I was part of the Auxiliary Security Forces, back then for a few years. One night, during force protection drills, which we were required to man the base as if we were being attacked, wearing that huge Darth Vader-like blue brain bucket along with your best friend's sidearm M16 and other LARPing-like gear. I got lucky and stood an 8-hour watch with a friend. As we were patrolling the water treatment section of the base, we started hearing what appeared to be drums or war drums in the distance coming from the north. This base is in the middle of nowhere, so we chalked it up to machinery echoes at 3 a.m. Right? While we were roving back south, we could hear it coming from the south, so we stopped and started to watch the south and west side of the base because it appeared to be following us. So we radioed dispatch for assistance as the drums started sounding louder and closer. A single unit showed up with a DoD civilian police officer and an actual master of arms and pointed all their SUV lights towards the area where it appeared the noise was coming from. We waited about 20 minutes before silence came over. Right after that, the drum beats re-emerged from the north side. We freaked out a little bit, but at this point we just went back to kicking rocks while the unit went to investigate. We started putting 2 and 2 together and just let it go. It wasn't every night you could hear it, and it was mostly random.
One time I was at an Air Force base in the ROKs, and we had a power outage at night. All of us walked out to our hangar doors to see what the problem was, and we saw a very large triangular shape passing over our hangar. It was a clear moonless night previously, and when we went outside to look, we noticed the starscape being covered then slowly uncovered. No sound associated with the event, other than the normal sounds of the location, and I'll never forget it. I was around 7 years old, and I'm a boy, when I made friends with a neighbor girl, and we would frequently play together. She had an older brother that was around 12 to 13 who would babysit us during these hangouts. One day my parents let me go over to their place on my own, as their house was in spitting distance of ours, but the brother was the only one home. He assured me that his sister would be home soon, so he lured me out to the backyard. For background, the house was completely fenced in, and all backyard had a tree line surrounding it. He told me to wait by the swings, which I did, and all of a sudden he charged at me with a sledgehammer. I fell in on my back in fear, and his swing landed between my legs into the ground. I ran as fast as I could to my house. My parents to this day say it was just horseplay, but I'll never forget the look in his eyes after he missed that swing.
The following story takes place in Fort Dix, New Jersey. My aunt, grandmother, and also my mother, uncle, and grandfather, when they were all alive, all claimed there was something demonic there, especially in and around the officer housing. Apparently a mess of officers didn't want to stay in the provided houses, and the enlisted asked if they could swap. Grandpa was enlisted and heard about this, and moved himself and his family into one of the houses. Everyone claims that even in the summer, the house wouldn't get above the low 60s. The brightest light bulbs would hardly provide much light, and the dog refused to go into the basement, and the cat litter pans would be flipped. My mother swore she would see shadow people watching her from around corners, and my aunt had one pusher while she was in the shower. My uncle had the choice to either have the entire basement to himself or the small office as his bedroom, and he picked the first option. He began sleeping in the living room after getting his feet grabbed when he would go down the basement steps. He mentioned after having a fight with Grandpa that something kept pushing its fingers into his bruises, and he woke up with more cuts and scrapes than he went to bed with. Everyone would always have some sort of scratch or bruise that they didn't remember getting. Grandma and Grandpa mentioned knowing that it was going on, but tried to continue on without acknowledging it.
I was out in the middle of the Pacific on deployment in 2016, in the smoke pit about 1 a.m. Beautiful, clear night, so a bunch of us are watching the stars. There's zero light pollution out there, and the sky is amazing at night. There was this one bright light that hadn't moved since we got there, when all of a sudden, it flew across the sky super fast, stopped instantly at another point for about 30 seconds before zipping off across the sky, making a turn at an impossible speed, the sharpness, and zooming off and then disappearing. Everyone up there saw it and were all like, "Yep, that was a UFO." I was in a club with a girl who I think was called Caroline, and since I'm not sure, and it was 28 years ago, I will continue to refer to her as Caroline. It was going well, except that I was very drunk, and when we were outside to spend some time together, I sat in a bench and puked. She sat with me a while and wanted to walk me home, but I do not handle vomiting very well, and it was her night, with lots of friends in the club, so I insisted she go back in and I walk it off back home. As we separated, a man came from the shadows with a knife, the sort of knife that has no real use apart from stabbing people. It turns out the club Browns had a gay night on a Thursday, and he was out to murder a homosexual. It was the very early 90s, and queer bashing was sadly still a thing. He was very clear in outlining his plan, and explained to me why he was going to do it, and in my drunken state, I tried to argue that the club was not a gay club and I was not gay. Anyway, look, I had been there with Caroline. He was having none of it, and he worked himself up to this, and was visibly shaking with anxious excitement. He was going to knife me in the face, because I was giving money to a club that supported homosexuality. Also, I was English, which in his nationalist Scottish mind was absolute proof that I was a homosexual. I argued that I was leaving the awful place, walking away, so I was the good guy, not my finest hour. Why not worry about Caroline instead, since she was going back in there with more cash? I was very, very drunk, and while I fully recognized what was going on, I truly did not associate it with any fear of the outcome. It was like watching a scene in a video game. Anyway, this chap asked me which one was Caroline, and I said, "Here, give me the knife, I'll do it." And he did, and I threw it on the roof and walked home. In the morning I remembered it, but was not even sure if it had really happened. But that night I met up with everyone, and I was some sort of hero. Although I really was not. I was an idiot. The highlight in this storytelling was that I had thrown the knife right up into the gutter. It was a pitched roof. Lobbing a knife onto it was not a reliable method of disposing of it, so it should have just come right back down, and then I walked away very calmly. In reality, I turned the way I had thrown the knife, felt a bit sick about it, forgot all about the chap who was going to stab me with it. His decision upon losing the knife was to wander quietly away, saved me much more than any of my own actions, some which appear incredibly cowardly,
in the light of day. Last year I was roughly 50 miles off the coast of New York, and I saw one extremely bright light in the sky which I assumed was a light from the shore. When it dawned on me that it didn't make sense due to how far offshore was, I grabbed the binoculars for a closer look. Crazy thing was, I could not figure out if this was 2 miles or 20 miles away. It looked like a giant, burning ball in the sky, wasn't very high, and I just knew it wasn't a plane. I thought maybe some military flare exercise, but ruled that out because it was not descending. After about 5 to 10 minutes of trying to figure out what the damn thing was, it was gone. Just myself and one other guy were standing there, watching on the bridge. It was around 3 to 4 a.m. We were so confused and stunned when it was just gone. It didn't burn up or slowly fade, just flat out disappeared.
I work at the US Air Force. I'm not allowed to say what I do, but my frame flew in Vietnam and carried dead bodies back, and after Vietnam it was repurposed. All of the older frames from that era are supposedly haunted from dead soldiers. I've spent mid-shift, midnight to 7 a.m. on these frames, and I've heard people scream out in pain. I've asked for a tool and had someone hand it to me, and then turn around and they were gone. Multiple times you'll hear someone's name being called. I don't believe in ghosts, but those frames creep the hell out of me. This happened to a friend of mine. She went to university with me, and she always seemed relatively level-headed. But then she got into the escort scene, and her behavior started to act up. She was making loads of money, and instead of paying off her uni debt like I said she should, she began splashing out on loads of stuff. But she was relatively young, so I kind of get it. Anyway, one day she tells me that she's agreed to meet this guy as an escort, go out with him a few hours, and that she might meet us at the clubs later, but that she'll tell me how it goes. I don't hear from her that night, and come home, and don't think anything more of it. The next day, she's not at uni. She wasn't around campus, but I didn't find that particularly odd. It's not until the news hits, and I see her face on the news. Turns out the guy who she had been escorting with had taken her to his apartment. She had gone all the way up, and something or other had happened, and she ended up squeezing herself out of a narrow window 30 stories up and plummeting to her death. After a while, 2 people were charged with murder. It was a couple in around their 30s. The police suspected that the man had escorted my friend, and then his girlfriend or partner or whatever had showed up and was angry. Something or other happened, and maybe they murdered her, but wanted to cover it up, and so threw her body out the window. The thing that never adds up, though, is that the window, according to the police report, was really small. She would have had to have dived in head first and then squeeze her body really hard, like she wanted to kill herself. So if someone wanted to stop her, they could have easily pulled her out. No. I think these people must have done something, and they wanted to get rid of her quickly. So when they were done doing what they needed to do, they just threw her out the window and called it suicide. I don't believe they were ever charged, and it always pisses me off. My friend is gone. Be careful what you do out there, girls. I am a Canadian Army officer. I work in a garrison that's been around for a while. It has actually been in service since before World War II. In one of the old hangars, which is now demolished, there used to be airplanes there. We had our mess, bars where we would grab a drink, and in the officers' mess, there was a Bible, a very old Bible, that no one knew exactly where it came from, but it looked old. Everyone that has worked around that Bible has heard or seen weird stuff. It started with the following routine. Every once in a while, we would find this old Bible thrown around in a complete mess.
The Bible, which was next to two other more recent ones, would be in a glass display which was in a locker. We found it super weird, but there's a civilian airport literally next to our base, so we thought maybe the vibrations or airplanes caused this. We even changed the direction of the camera to try and catch if someone was messing with the Bible, but we never saw anything. Then one day we had to do some renos, and there were these huge cylindrical paper towers, very, very heavy, and for some reason I can't quite remember, we left the 3 Bibles on the top of one of the cylinders. Or the day after the cylinders were down, they were thrown, and the Bibles were thrown not far from where the cylinders fell. I'm talking 6'1" cylinders, and that cylinder was heavy as hell. In another occurrence, there were 2 female NCOs working near the stand, where the Bible was, with 2 others on a Tuesday night shift. The floor was made of a kind of old wood/plastic, which our boots made it very easy to know where someone was coming. So the 2 girls, Master Corporal and a Corporal, were in different rooms. The Master Corporal was focused when she suddenly hears boots running right next to her, close to the door entrance. Of course, the light was low. The building was very old and never had great lighting. She turned super fast and asked the Corporal if it was her, that she just passed next to her. She yelled in the other room that it wasn't. No need to say that they left the building really fast. There have been a lot of occurrences like that. There's even a captain that refused to touch it and made privates move it instead. The building was demolished maybe 3 years ago now, and we never heard back from that devilish book. My friend's dad used to run a bodega somewhere in South America. He never did tell me where, but the events that happened disturbed me no end. One day his dad was just in the shop minding his own business. It was around 10 o'clock at night, and he was just getting ready to close up shop and go have his dinner with his wife. The house was connected to the shop, and just as he's about to do a few errands and tidy up before closing, a young man of about 23 busts into the shop. He immediately pulls a gun on this guy's dad and tells him that he wants all the money in the register. The dad laughs and says that he has very little today and that he's wasting his time. But this kid doesn't take no for an answer or a joke and immediately unloads his weapon into my dad's friend. Suffice to say, he didn't make it. The kid makes off with a couple of dollars worth of stuff and is caught 2 days later. He was sentenced to a long time in prison for his actions, and I don't know if he's out yet. My friend was very young when this happened, so he never really knew his dad. Around 2015, I was in the truck training a new airman on flight line driving at night when we were doing a routine inspection on the equipment out there. He knew what he was doing, so I just stargazed, like I like to. It was a clear night, so it was perfect. After a minute, I noticed the stars were disappearing in clusters and reappearing after a second, and realized something really dark and large was gliding over the top of us. I told my co-worker to look at it, and he saw it too. It was this giant crescent-shaped thing just flying silently overhead, west away from the mountains. It was seriously bizarre. I've never seen anything like it before, and still have no idea what it was. I should probably ask him if he remembers it. My old barrack room in the Marines was a living nightmare. I have a lot of stories from it, but I want to share this first occurrence. So I was stationed on Camp Pendleton at the time, and grew up near there, so I'd often go and see my parents at their house on weekends, and even some weeknights. If I went home, then I'd wake up at around 4:30 to 5 in the morning, then drive back to base for PT. If I got there early with time to spare, I'd take a quick nap in the barracks room. This was one of those mornings. I shared the barracks room with a roommate, but he was home on leave at the time. Anyway, I was napping in my room when I felt someone shake me awake. I sat up in bed a little confused because my very first thought was that my mum was shaking me awake at home because I'd overslept. but I was in my barrack room, so I just kind of brushed it off and laid back down. I was laying on my side, with my back to the wall. Shortly after I closed my eyes, I felt something sit on the edge of the bed in front of my feet. I thought my brains must have been playing tricks on me, when I felt this thing get up, walk around the bed, and sit behind my feet. So, it's now sitting between my feet and the wall. I'm very creeped out. I'm still laying there wide awake, but eyes closed, not really reacting. The thing then starts crawling up the bed, like I'm feeling the bed indenting as their hands and knees move upwards. In my head, I'm telling myself to let it get to your head and see what happens. But it gets to my belly button, I freak out. I throw my hand over there and flip the light on, trying to rationalize it, thinking it's a cat or a rat. But of course there's nothing. So I just take off and drive to the parking lot, where I have a nap in my car instead. I have a schizophrenic brother who started an argument when we were in our late teens over my dad giving me his old iPhone. He decided a rational tactic was to chase me with a chainsaw, then try to chainsaw my car. The police came, but not before he broke my mother's ribs. I've had an intervention order against him since, and no longer consider him family. Our buildings were haunted. Now I say buildings and not building, because I managed to spend minimum one night in every barracks at basic training, due to a string of really unfortunate injuries that have nothing to do with this story. We heard voices during lights out. You could hear someone going up and down the central stairway. It was 3 stories, and it would echo like hell. Upon inspection, there was nothing out there. Our stuff would also move about. One of the lads had his inspection out on an empty bed, and by morning it had all been thrown around the room. I would have suspected our corporals, but normally the damage was localized within your specific area. This was all over the room. I've got to say the weirdest one for me was when I saw a guy walking up the stairs as I was coming back from a smoke at 2 a.m. I called out to him and ran up to catch him up, and he just vanished. No doors open, nothing, just simply gone. I didn't recognize them, and they didn't have the standard number 2 all over haircut, so it definitely wasn't one of our lads. Who knows? I work the evening shift at a hospital that is believed to be, at least by 90% of the staff, haunted. I'm part of the 90%. You see, there have been horror stories about every building, floor, and pretty much every part of the campus. I mostly wander around alone as a housekeeper, and that makes it much worse. At least when my mind is on it. Usually I try not to think about it. My personal experience was back in the ultrasound wing of the radiology clinic. By the time I get around to that area, the lights automatically dim, and there isn't anything I can do about it. It's always spooky back there at night, so I usually just get done with what I need to do and move on. The place is kind of shaped like a J, like a long hallway that curves around. On the inner side of the curve, there's a dressing room that opens up to a mammography suite, and then opens again at the top of the J. If you're standing at the bottom of the J, you can see through the doors of both rooms to the top of the J. I was standing back there, trying to bag on my card, when something moved in the corner of my eye. I looked up, and through the dressing and mamma rooms, to the other doorway opposite me. I vividly remember it like it was yesterday. A male figure walks past the door right before my eyes. I literally watched it amble slowly across my field of vision. There are no male ultrasound techs here, and it was not my boss. It looked like it was wearing dark clothing, had long hair, but was definitely male. I snapped out of it and ran over to see if some freak had wandered in, but there wasn't anyone. I grabbed my stuff and ran out without finishing all the work, because screw that. Another story, which isn't my personal experience, comes from the second floor of the hospital. The second floor has nothing but offices and computer labs, all adjacent to one corridor that spans the entire length of the building. On one end is a set of elevators, and on the other, a pair of double doors that opens into a computer lab. This floor is infamous for being the domain of something the workers affectionately call Matilda. The first story I heard about her was from a co-worker who knew someone who worked on that floor. He came in for whatever reason doing office stuff and was going home late one night. He walks out of the office and starts towards the elevators when something catches his eye, so he turns towards the computer lab. At the end of the hallway, there was what looked like a patient peeking into the lab. He walks towards her and asks her who she is and what floor she came from. She turns around, and she has no face. The office guy is frozen in place, scared out of his mind. He wants to run away, but he doesn't want to turn his attention away from whoever or whatever is staring him down at the other end of the hall. What does he do instead? He closes his eyes as tight as he can, and after several seconds or minutes or however long it was, he opens them, and she's gone. He says he's never ran as fast in his life as he did that night, straight outside without ever looking back. Another Matilda happening was when one of the managers left a tape recorder going in his office, also on the second floor, because he wanted to see if he could catch any weird noises or voices. The next day I'm walking by his office with a co-worker, and he calls us in there and plays the recording to see if we hear it. After forever with nothing, a faint voice comes in and says, "Turn it off." That was spooky as hell. I've got another story. I'm in the MRI suite right now where my friend, Sandra, told me she had a scary experience. Like the ultrasound area, MRI can sometimes give off a creepy vibe. I've never seen anything back here personally, but Sandra has. She told me about a time where she had come in late one night to prep the MRI. The suite is shaped like a W, with the middle wedge representing the computer workstation, and the outer ones being the MRI rooms themselves. On opposite sides of the workstation, there are windows looking into the rooms, and you can see the reflection of the window behind you in the one in front of you. She was back here alone that night, prepping the machine and half asleep. It began to dawn on her that something felt wrong, and she began to experience a feeling of dread. Whatever it was made her feel so uncomfortable and restless that she snapped out of it and woke up. She looks up into the window, into the suite, and sees a silhouette of a figure standing in the corner. She doesn't know what the hell it is. Thinking, she sees things, but remembers how I said you can see the reflection of one window in that other? She realizes that the figure isn't standing in the corner of that room, but is rather standing in front of the other window behind her, just staring at her. Let's set the background first. I grew up in a very rural area. My parents have a pretty big piece of land with a nice 2-story farmhouse in the middle of it. To the south of the house is a peach orchard. The west is where the driveway is. It goes through an alley of cottonwood and pecan trees, but the land is pretty open and was used for cattle farming. The east and north is dense woodland and shrubs, which reaches all the way to our neighbors about 2 miles. Back then, I was working at a carpenter shop in town. I had just gotten my driver's license, and so I was able to get there on my own. It was about an hour-and-a-half drive, though. We started fairly late in the day at about 10 a.m. The owner of the company was sort of a night owl and loved to sleep in, but because of that, we had to stay until 9 p.m. That was no problem in the summer, but turned out to be a bit of a nuisance in the winter, as it got dark pretty early, and I hated driving in the dark because the lights on my car weren't the best anymore. I drove a 1987 Chevy pickup, which had obviously seen better days. I hadn't had much money back then, so this was all I could afford. So one day in late December, about 10 or 11 years ago, I left work much later than usual. I'd made a pretty stupid mistake on a nightstand I was building for a customer and needed to fix it, as the customer was going to pick it up the next day. When I finally finished, it was about midnight. I cussed out my own stupidity, closed the shop up tight, and went to my car. There are 2 routes I can take to get home. One is on a highway, the other one is through the backcountry, and dirt roads surrounded by thick brush and trees. I usually took the highway, as it was much faster and safer, especially in the dark. But this day, there had been an accident, and the highway was blocked by emergency services, so I took the long way home. As soon as I left the main road and made my way up the dirt trails, I got this feeling, you know the one, as if something bad is about to happen, almost like impending doom. The longer I drove on the road, the stronger the feeling got, until it felt like all of my body and soul were aching desperately to turn around, drive back all the way to the roadblock, and wait until it got opened again. I tried to suppress it as best I could, and tried to convince myself that I had driven this route many times, and I knew that it was safe, albeit a bit rough on the truck. When I was driving through an especially rugged piece of brush, only about 10 miles from my parents' farm, all of a sudden, my left front tire popped. I did my best to keep the truck on the road and made it to a safe spot. I kept a spare tire in the toolbox and had changed tires quite a lot on my own, and I knew it would be just a minor inconvenience, and I would be rolling again in a matter of minutes. That's where I was wrong. I climbed up on the truck's bed, only to find that my toolbox had been broken into, and all of my tools and my spare tire had been stolen. So there I was, still miles away from the nearest settlement, in bear and wolf country, in the middle of the night with no cell phone, and no way to repair my truck. I always kept a sort of survival kit in my toolbox with a blanket, a small axe, a fire starter kit, and some MREs, but it had been stolen too. Thank God I still had my trusty pucko, which my sister gave me when she moved to Finland. So I made the second, but bigger mistake on the day. I decided to walk home. To this day, I still don't know why I made this decision. All I had to do was wait in my truck until sunrise, and I knew a neighbor was driving this road every day at around 8 a.m. He could have taken me to town and called my parents to get the truck, but some stupid fart in my brain said, "Nah, we're walking." So I went. I locked the car, took my rucksack with my belongings with me, and began walking. I couldn't have walked far when I got this eerie feeling, like something or somebody is watching me. I turned around, but nothing was there. I picked up my pace to make it out, when all of a sudden I heard some rustling in the bushes to my left. I called out, "If there's someone there," but of course received no answer. The feeling of being watched got stronger and stronger as the rustling became more frequent, when suddenly the brush stopped and I came to a small clearing. That's when he spoke to me for the first time. "Hey there, boy." He had a pretty weird pronunciation. The first part was spoken softly, almost gently, but the boy was like an explosion in my ears. He made a tiny pause in between and then spewed out "boy." He was big, 6'6", wearing a long trench coat and hat. Grey, short hair with lifeless eyes, almost like that of a perished fish. But what really scared me was his dog. He had a huge, black, shepherd-like dog, but it looked very wild, almost like a wolf. I immediately froze with fear. I always heard this term, but could never imagine it being like this. I couldn't move. I just couldn't. I tried, trust me, God, did I try. "What you doing there, boy?" he asked. "Don't you want to talk to me, boy?" I still couldn't move a finger, but my mouth slowly started to work again. I told him about the truck and how I was trying to walk home, but I don't think he was able to understand a word that I was saying, as I was stuttering and slurring the words due to fear. He made few steps towards me, his dog fixated on me like prey. He came so close that I could smell him, a very odd smell, a bit like old cigarettes, but there was something else that I couldn't point out. I still stood there unable to move. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, almost like he wanted to remember the smell of fear radiating from me. He started to grin, not a genuine, honest grin, but the one where the eyes aren't involved. They stayed as lifeless as they were. "Be careful out here, boy. There's a lot of dangerous things out here, boy," he said, and vanished into the brush as suddenly as he had appeared. I started to thaw up and was able to move my body again. All of a sudden, my knees felt weak and wouldn't bear the weight of my body anymore. I collapsed to the ground and my whole body began to shake uncontrollably, and I began to sob with relief. As soon as I had regained control over my body again, I ran like I never did before and never have again, all the way home, which was quite a long way. I can't describe the feeling of relief coming over me when I saw the all-so-familiar porch lights coming up in the distance, and I reached the edge of the woodlands on our property. "Hey there, boy." My heart skipped a beat. I screamed from sheer terror and knew that this would be the end. So, I didn't stop running. I ran and ran and ran and never even bothered to look back. Only when I reached the warm yellow circles of light cast by our porch lamps did I dare look back. He stood there on the edge of the woods, like he did on the clearing, his animal on a leash next to him. He grinned this creepy grin again. I fumbled out my keys, as my parents locked the back door at 8. I unlocked the door and stumbled in. Only when I had locked the door I started to feel remotely safe again. I went upstairs to my room and made sure that all the windows were locked on my way up. When I looked out the window, he was gone. I told my dad about this when we got into the truck the next day. He said this was likely Samuel, an old hermit who had a small cottage down there in the woods, who had been living there for at least 30 years, but that he had never seen him with his own eyes. So in retrospect, perhaps I was never in grave danger. Maybe. But nevertheless, to the strange creep in the woods, I'd rather not meet you again.